Chapter 527. 34 Chinese Network, in 1 second wonderful pop-up window free reading, clatter. The chain was suddenly tightened, and when Yuan Qing, with a pale face, stood up again. He couldn't see He Ju through the stone wall, but he still looked at He Ju coldly. If his eyes could kill, He Ju would have died thousands of times. He Ju was not affected at all. He walked to Wen Hun, and his face returned to its usual gentleness. He reached out and patted Wen Hun's thin shoulder. "I believe you. The words of ghosts won't make you lose your way." As he said, he turned his eyes to Su Li. A dim light flashed in his eyes, but he cupped his hands and said respectfully, "I have received the message from Lord Immortal of Ghost. There is such a strong practitioner like you in NI sect. I wonder why you changed your appearance and came to our sect. For what?" As soon as the words came out, Wen Hun's body suddenly shook, and his eyes on Su Li wavered. Yes, he was possessed. Perhaps all these were the inner demons brought by the new ghosts. As long as he didn't listen and see, everything could return to the original state. Master. Su Yu was the Grand Elder of NI sect. She must have other purposes to come to the sect. He couldn't believe it. Was the only one he could believe, the Master? He tried to convince himself, but at this moment, his heart wavered, and he could no longer believe anyone in the field. Su Li's perception was so keen that she saw the change in Wen Hun's eyes. This silly boy was still too young. As the thought flashed through her mind, her eyes became cold, but her lips were slightly raised. The smile was full of deep meaning. "I don't deserve to be called as the senior. I heard that Lord he is so powerful that the disciples you sent have infiltrated the Wanli sect, the Liang sect and other 12 sects. Half of the Zhozhou region is under your control. Is it true?" "Ha ha ha," He Ju chuckled and shook his head. "Senior, you think too highly of me. It's difficult for me to maintain the sect, and I don't hesitate to make a deal with ghosts. How can I extend my hand to other sects?" "Really? Then I misunderstood your sect." Su Li's words seemed to be an apology, but her tone was not apologetic at all. Instead, she said with strong interest, "However, it's really an eye-opener for me this time. I heard that there is a Ensi in the mountain who cut his own flesh and blood to feed a sect. I really admire him. Can Lord he introduce me to him?" He Ju's eyes brightened, and he nodded without hesitation. "You are a strong man of the human clan. Lord Ensi will be very happy to see you. Please come with me." As he said, he glanced at Wen Hun, who was still leaning against the mountain wall behind Su Li. When he was about to speak, he heard Su Li said with a smile, "Your disciple Xinqing is simple. This experience is not a bad thing. I think he has understood something. Lord he doesn't have to punish him. Ha ha, Senior has misunderstood." He Ju laughed, but his eyes darkened. Wen Hun was still useful. It was a waste to let him follow them. Moreover, with Wen Hun's low cultivation, it was difficult for him to survive, let alone break the stone wall. Everything was under his control. He changed his mind instantly and snorted, "I'll give you another chance. Stay here and reflect on your mistakes. If you don't have a heart of stone, you can't cultivate." Then, he smiled again, and waved his hand, "Senior, this way, please." Su Li glanced at Wen Hun, who was leaning against the stone wall with his head down. She nodded with a smile, and disappeared in the hole with He Ju. Until the two disappeared, Wen Hun raised his head, and his eyes were full of pain and self-mockery. His lips were bitten by him at some time, and the bloody smell spread in his mouth. "Master, sister is a liar. Your sister is indeed a liar." When Yuan Qing, who had been silent all the time, suddenly spoke and interrupted Wen Hun's self-pity. "However, she didn't cheat you, but He Ju." Wen Hun looked back in amazement, and saw Wen Yuanqing's calm but unfocused eyes. He suddenly felt nervous. My son should be able to distinguish right from wrong. Wen Yuanqing seemed to have figured out Su Li's background. He said in a calm tone, "It has been hundreds of years since what happened in those days, but the hatred in my heart has not faded. Instead, it has become stronger. There are some things. Whether you believe it or not, you are qualified to know." As he said, he looked at Senior Sister Apprentice Yu in white beside him. Senior Sister Apprentice Yu in white nodded, got up, and floated out of the stone wall. She looked at Wen Hun with a smile, and then stretched out her transparent fingertip, wanting to touch Wen Hun's glabella gently. Wen Hun resisted and tilted his head back. But when he saw the disappointment on senior sister apprentice Yu in White's face, he stopped and let the cold fingertip touch his glabella. Since he couldn't see anything clearly, he chose to follow his instinct this time. A trace of cold touch poured into the awareness sea through the glabella, and quickly turned into pictures, which flashed back in front of him. He saw a young practitioner who looked very similar to him came to the foot of the mountain of the immortal cultivation sect with a woman who looked like senior sister apprentice Yu. They talked and laughed all the way, and came to find his friend He-ju. When he saw senior sister apprentice Yu was pregnant, the young man was overjoyed. He believed He-ju's words and went to the Yin Mountain to see Insi, so that the fetus in his wife's belly could have a higher starting point on the road of cultivation. Then, under the gloomy and bloody sky, a terrifying giant opened its bloody mouth, and countless masses of rotten flesh wriggled in its mouth, screaming. The young man was so angry that his eyes almost popped out. He helplessly watched senior sister apprentice Yu, who was about to give birth, was dismembered and thrown into the hell-like mouth. He angrily used the forbidden skill of Ghost Clan and sacrificed everything. Finally, he just cut off a mass of rotten flesh and died regretfully. Then, in the long darkness, the soul soaked with unwillingness and hatred seemed to have an incredible change in the Yin Mountain. He incarnated into a ghost, crazily devoured the ghosts in the Yin Mountain, and took revenge again. This time, Insi was caught off guard and was seriously injured. But Insi was Insi after all. Even if he became a different ghost, he was still defeated. Relying on the immortality of ghosts, Insi didn't waste his strength to kill him, and only sealed him in the mountain wall. In the long years, he broke free from his chains and committed suicide again and again. He tortured himself again and again. The obsession in his heart became stronger and stronger. In the end, he attracted the ghost floating in the Yin Mountain and turned it into his wife's appearance. At that moment, he was quiet. His wife was not a ghost, but an inexplicable special existence attached to him. She was very weak, could be seen, could penetrate any matter at will, couldn't be attacked by anyone, and couldn't speak. But he just understood what his wife was expressing. "Don't be sad. I will always be with you." The picture seemed to be long, but in fact, everything flashed in Wen Hun's mind in a moment. Suddenly opening his eyes, he leaned against the wall and gasped for breath like a drowning fish. His chest heaved up and down violently, and sweat seeped out of his forehead, causing his hair to stick together. He was in a sorry state. The impact of the truth was too great for him to bear. I thought you were eaten by Insi before you came to this world. After all, it took me a lot of time to become a ghost." There was a deeper meaning on Wen Yuanqing's face. There was a long-lost kindness on his face. The ghost's unique voice made this kindness with a strong sense of weirdness. "I don't know what method He-ju used to keep you alive, but you can practice Ghost Chapter of the Immortal Cultivation Sect. Except for the Ghost Clan, you can practice Ghost Chapter without being affected. Your clothes are red, which is a sign of turning into a ghost. You can't continue to practice Ghost Chapter, otherwise the consequences will be unpredictable. Not all ghosts can keep their minds before death, and I am a special case." Wen Hun took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and calmed down completely. Wen Yuanqing closed his mouth and stopped disturbing him. No matter whether Wen Hun believed it or not, that memory could make Wen Hun's temperament to a higher level. After the transformation, no one could predict what Wen Hun would think. Wen Yuanqing thought that it would take at least 2 hours for Wen Hun to digest all the information. In fact, he opened his eyes in just a few minutes, and his eyes were full of anxiety. "Insi and He-ju are on the same side. Isn't my sister in danger?" Wen Yuanqing was stunned, and his heart was inexplicably sour. Then he laughed. It seemed that he was not qualified to be jealous of the woman who led He-ju away. "Your sister is extremely smart," Wen Yuanqing said with a self-deprecating expression. "At least she is much smarter than me. She can see something wrong with He-ju at a glance. She just saw He-ju's arrogance just now, so that I can have time alone with you." She deliberately led him away. But Insi can't even beat you. My sister, when Hun gritted his teeth and said. From his memory, he could see that Insi's strength was extremely horrible, more horrible than any existence he had ever seen. Even if Su Li destroyed the Hall of the Lord of Sect with one punch as a lesson, he was still incomparable to the Colossus. Before he finished speaking, there was a burst of applause beside Wen Hun, and there was a chuckle in the applause. Silly boy, I didn't care about you in vain. Su Li's graceful figure appeared out of thin air, and she looked at Wen Hun with a smile. Wen Hun was instantly dumbfounded. He pointed at Su Li, and then turned his head to look at the place where Su Li and He-ju disappeared. Sister, why didn't you and, you mean that? Su Li stroked her hair behind her ears, and said with a smile, that is naturally me. He-ju and Su Li talked and laughed all the way to an ancient and huge pavilion in the Yin Mountain. Senior, Lord Insi is waiting in the pavilion. I won't go in with you. He-ju cupped his hands and stopped in place. Su Li looked up at the huge pavilion in the dark clouds unhurriedly. In her eyes, it was not a pavilion, but a huge ghost with its mouth wide open, waiting for food. Senior, what are you waiting for? Seeing Su Li didn't go in, He-ju asked with a smile. There was no sense of urgency in his words. Su Li smiled sweetly. I'm just thinking about the meat in the room 2 days ago, which was given by Senior Insi. If I don't eat that piece of meat, it will go moldy. If Senior Insi gives me more, how can I keep it? It's really worrying. He-ju's smile froze on his face. Chapter 528. 34 Chinese Network, in 1 second, wonderful pop-up window free reading. It was obviously not appropriate to discuss the topic of Insi's flesh and blood in front of Insi. He-ju laughed awkwardly and didn't know what to say to trick Su Li. At this time, he suddenly heard a strong thought from Insi. Extremely pure ghost energy. She is the best blood food, like when Yuan Qing, even better than when Yuan Qing. After eating her, I can restore my peak strength and even go further. He-ju's expression froze for a moment, and then his eyes immediately turned into surprise. An emperor of the human clan and ghosts were of different origins, so the benefits were limited. In addition, he was afraid of Su Li's unknown background. Originally, he only planned to let Insi control this woman, and then let her go and continue to be dormant. But after hearing Insi's words, he immediately forgot all the cautiousness. If Insi could recover, he didn't have to worry at all. He straightened his bowed back, and a weird smile spread rapidly on his face. Your Excellency, there is one thing I think you should understand. What? Su Li's attention was attracted, but she didn't see a purple-black arc suddenly burst out like thunder behind her. Puff! The ferocious scale armor pierced her chest from behind. Ha 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 ha. He-ju swung his ferocious purple tail and pulled it out from Su Li's chest. What emperor? I was expecting. Before he finished speaking, he suddenly noticed that there was no blood on the bloody hole in Su Li's chest. It's a trap. His expression changed slightly. Without saying a word, he stamped his feet, and a gust of wind rose. He retreated quickly with the box. But he only retreated a few feet, and his figure was forcibly stagnated in the air. He didn't know when his thick purple-black scale tail was firmly pinched by a slender hand. Su Li raised her head slightly, and her eyes under her hair were like a pitch-black deep pool, full of pity. It turns out to be a small lizard. It's old, and its meat is not very delicious. You are courting death. He-ju had never been so humiliated, especially by his recognized food. He immediately became angry, and the purple-black muscles bulged from the loose skin. In the blink of an eye, he broke the disguise of the human clan, and turned into a ghost lizard with a height of 30 feet. His hands turned into claws, like sharp knives, and stabbed at Su Li's eyes. It's really barbaric food. Su Li licked her red lips, and the light in her eyes faded away. She no longer suppressed the nature of evil ghost. At the moment when He-ju's claws pierced into Su Li's eyes, Su Li seemed to melt like ice and snow. She turned into a pool of black liquid and quickly climbed up along the claws. At the same time, a tingling pain came from her arms to her brain, as if there were thousands of mouths gnawing at her flesh and blood in the pool of liquid. What the hell? It can actually devour me. I'm a ghost. He was shocked, and an unprecedented fear rose in his heart. He screamed, "Insi, do it. Save me." Boom. The pavilion in the dark clouds collapsed in the blink of an eye. Lumps of rotten flesh quickly gathered together from the collapsed pavilion, turning into a mountain of flesh. The mountain of flesh squirmed for a while, and countless legs grew out from its bottom. It was surprisingly agile, and in the blink of an eye, it flashed behind He, opened its huge mouth, and swallowed He along with it. "I'll eat it." A huge face appeared on the surface of Insi's flesh mountain. He burped and his whole body squirmed. White steam rose from his body as he tried his best to digest the food. Suddenly, his expression changed drastically. He opened his trembling mouth and took a deep breath. Whoosh! An extremely strong suction appeared out of thin air. The wind and clouds changed, and the whole Yin mountain was raging. Countless ghosts screamed and were sucked into the mouth of the mountain of flesh. Even the dead trees around were pulled off the ground and flew to the mountain of flesh. Why is the wind suddenly blowing? Wen-hun stood up in surprise, and looked at the source of the suction from a distance. Because of the seal on the mountain wall, the suction he felt was very small, but he still felt dizzy and his soul was unstable. The power of the seal is getting weaker. Wen Yuanqing's eyes flashed, and his unfocused sight fell on the pneuma beside Wen-hun. "Insi is stalled. Sister, this," Wen-hun was about to ask, and suddenly there was a loud noise in his ears. Boom! It seemed that something exploded. Blood dyed half of the sky, and then fell down. Wen-hun subconsciously caught a piece of debris flying over. He fixed his eyes on it, and found it was a wriggling rotten flesh. He was so scared that he immediately threw it away. At this moment, there was a harsh scream in his ears. He looked up and saw a stream of light zooming in his eyes like a meteor. Boom! The earth quaked and the mountain shook. The stream of light fell into the hard rocks of Yin Mountain, and the whole ground cracked like a spider web. The cracks extended along the ground to the stone wall, and a strong and cold pneuma escaped from the cracks. Clatter! The chain rattled. Wen Yuanqing stood up, and saw the figure in the center of the crack at the same time as Wen-hun. That was the evil ghost, which had been digested with only half of its body. Its surface was stained with a lot of yellow water stains, and the remaining part was still corroding tirelessly. What is this? Wen-hun only felt that his scalp was numb, but he did not look away. Soon he found a trace of familiarity from the corroded half-face, and couldn't help but widen his eyes. At this time, half of the evil ghost's body suddenly stood up like a corpse. The ghost energy around it vibrated, and all the yellow water stains were shaken off. Then it returned to the shadow as Su Li waved her hand. "My speed of devouring is not as fast as Insi. It seems that the means of Ghost Clan are not enough." Su Li's eyes flickered, and she saw the huge black shadow approaching slowly in the distance. She gently covered the stone wall with her palm, and said, "Wen-hun, retreat to the back of the mountain." Wen-hun trembled all over, and immediately retreated to the back of the mountain. He had been shocked too many times tonight, and his heart had been numb. At this moment, even if the sky fell down, he could not be more shocked. Seeing this, Su Li turned her head, and her red lips curved slightly. The golden thunder in her palm instantly filled the gap. Boom! The stone wall was torn and collapsed directly like a piece of fragile white paper. Wen Yuanqing, who was still secretly accumulating power, was slightly stunned. He punched in the air, which made him a little uncomfortable. However, he quickly adapted to it. When he smelled the pneuma of divine thunder in the air, he couldn't help but shrink his pupils, and was secretly horrified. Why is there the pneuma of divine thunder? Is it her means? At the same time, Su Li's voice came, and her tone was a little meaningful. "Protect your son, and you'd better stay away." Wen Yuanqing's eyes flashed with fear, and he pulled Wen-hun to retreat. He just got out of trouble, and was very weak, so he couldn't help. Besides, he was really afraid that he would be destroyed by the divine thunder. Insi didn't dare to lead to the test of thunder, but this woman was not a ghost. If she had the means of thunder, she might be able to kill Insi. Boom! Boom! Hills were flattened one after another, and Insi's huge figure slowly appeared in everyone's sight through the mist. His pale and pitted skin looked very gloomy and horrible under the moonlight. In the center of the mountain of flesh, there was a basin-sized bloody hole. The rotten flesh squirmed, and the bloody hole was constantly shrinking. He-Ju, who turned into his original body, stood on the top of the mountain of flesh. At this moment, his arms that were devoured by Su Li had grown out again. He looked at Su Li with bloodshot eyes. "You are the first one who dares to destroy my original body in thousands of years." Is that the true face of He-Ju? In the distance, Wen Hun's eyes were blank. At this moment, he finally recognized the truth. Everything he saw in that memory was true. Su Li smiled sweetly. Her petite figure standing under the mountain of flesh looked very small. "The taste of ghosts is very good. At least, my shadow likes you very much." As soon as these words came out, even the ghost, who represented horror, couldn't help but feel a chill. He was furious and stopped talking nonsense. "Insi, eat her." The mountain of flesh squirmed for a while, and the chilly wind blew. The fierce suction force acted on Su Li's whole body again. But the state of evil ghost in Su Li's original body couldn't be compared with a single evil ghost. She raised her eyebrows, stepped on a crack under her feet, and disappeared instantly. So fast. What a strong physical body. Wen Yuanqing marveled in his heart. He had never seen a human clan that could refine their physical body to such a degree. Could it be that the weakness of the human clan's physical body had been eliminated in Qingshui Circle after the rule changed? Bang! Su Li punched the mountain of flesh, and the shock wave rippled. The surrounding flesh and blood instantly exploded into holes, and countless rotten flesh fell down. But in the blink of an eye, the holes were filled by rotten flesh again. Su Li didn't intend to stop at all. Relying on the absolute speed, she turned into a sky full of residual shadows, and the mountain of flesh bloomed everywhere. When Yuanqing frowned and couldn't help but remind her, "Insi's body is very small. What you hit is the rotten flesh on the surface of his body. It can't cause any damage at all." Boom! Su Li punched another bloody hole with a width of 30 meters again, as if she didn't hear it. It was rare for a human target to stand her full strength. How could she be willing to kill it at once? He-Ju, who blended into the protection of the rotten flesh, looked at Su Li, who was beating crazily outside, and he was shocked and angry. "Why? My means don't have any effect." How could he let Su Li beat Insi violently? At this moment, he almost used all the means of ghosts such as poison, illusion, erosion, infiltration, and so on, but Su Li didn't respond at all. Was she still a fragile human clan? "What are you waiting for? No matter how many layers of flesh I have, I shouldn't waste them like this." Insi's angry thought came. He had never been humiliated by a little bug since he had consciousness. Now he just wanted to end it quickly and eat this little bug to restore his strength. He-Ju was aggrieved. Seeing that Insi's thought became colder and colder, he finally told the truth. "Do you think I don't want to? All my means are useless to her." "What?" Insi's body trembled. He was much older than He-Ju, so he immediately thought of the natural enemy of ghosts that had been extinct for a long time. He was extremely timid, so he didn't say a word. Hundreds of feet grew out from the bottom of his feet, and he retreated quickly. "Want to escape?" Su Li narrowed her eyes and sighed softly. "It's really boring." Before she finished speaking, her figure had disappeared like a phantom, and then appeared on the head of Insi, who was moving quickly. This time, even when Yuanqing didn't see it clearly, she became faster. She has never shown her real strength. When Yuanqing's pupils shrank suddenly, and he pulled Wen Hun to hide further subconsciously. The next moment, a golden line between heaven and earth dispersed the dark clouds. Chapter 529. 34 Chinese Network, in 1 second. Wonderful pop-up window-free reading, cloud-piercing golden line. Even if it was far away, when Yuanqing could smell the strong smell of sharp divine thunder drifting from a distance. It's really divine thunder of gold. Is this person a disciple of the holy sect of Wind Thunder? But the stubborn people of the holy sect of Wind Thunder are always hotheads. When they see something contaminated with ghost energy, they will boast of being righteous and kill it. After she killed the evil ghost, The next one. He frowned and said in a deep voice, "Let's go and have a look." Wen Hun had long wanted to know the situation of the battle, so he immediately followed Wen Yuanqing. Sizzle, under the action of divine thunder, the rotten flesh was irreversibly consumed. Finally, Insi revealed his real body, a black pig as tall as two people. "It turns out that you are really a little pig. It seems that the one under the Hall of the Lord is your clone." Su Li stopped the bombardment of divine thunder and summoned Kang Lei's cave to hover over Insi's head. Another more powerful breath of divine thunder instantly shrouded them, making Insi and Hiju completely desperate. "Sister Li, what is this? It disgusts me so much." In Kang Lei's cave, Su Bai stretched out a thunder branch and then took it back. He pointed to Hong Baizhu, who lived at the other end of Kang Lei's cave, "But it's not as annoying as her." Hong Baizhu's little face became serious, and she transmitted the sound in disgust. "I hate you, too. In a sense, you are each other's natural enemies. But now you are all mine, so you are not allowed to fight." Su Li transmitted the sound, and Su Bai nodded obediently. The little girl Hong Baizhu immediately put away her fierce expression and shrank back to the depth of Kang Lei's cave. Su Li laughed in her heart. Divine thunder and ghosts were supposed to kill each other as soon as they met. It was also a wonder that such a harmonious side appeared under her control. Insi and Hiju saw that Su Li was distracted, but the breath of divine thunder above their heads was more magnificent than that of Jinwu. They could not find a chance to escape at all. "Now I ask, and you answer. Do you hear me clearly?" Su Li looked back at them, and her tone was as leisurely as 2 days ago. But Insi could no longer act as calmly as before. He trembled and panicked. "Emperor, please spare my life. Everything is planned by Thousand-Faced Ghost. It has nothing to do with me." "Who is the Thousand-Faced Ghost?" Before Insi answered, Su Li heard a voice behind her. "The Thousand-Faced Ghost is Hiju. Hiju is my bosom friend. After being eaten by the Thousand-Faced Ghost, the Thousand-Faced Ghost changed into Hiju's appearance and tricked me into a dead end." Wen Yuanqing stood not far from Su Li. He originally wanted to sound out her background, but when he thought of her overbearing character just now, he finally swallowed his words of testing. Su Li nodded gently, and her gentle eyes fell on Hiju. "So, tell me, how is the plan to control the 12 sects going?" "The longer one lived, the more one cherished his life." Hiju, no, the Thousand-Faced Ghost, couldn't jump out of this rule either. He scolded Insi in his heart for betraying him even when he was about to die. After a moment of silence, he braced himself and asked, "If I tell you, can you spare my life?" Su Li raised her eyebrows and said in a gentle tone, "Give me a reason to let you go." "We can't let him go." Wen Yuanqing was full of hatred, but he couldn't calm down after all. He couldn't help but say, "The Thousand-Faced Ghost is cunning and vicious. He is definitely a scourge. We can't let him live." Su Li glanced at Wen Yuanqing. Although she didn't show any intention, Wen Yuanqing was stiff all over, and the alarm in his heart rang loudly. This was a warning. She was warning me not to meddle in other people's business. To this end, this woman is definitely not as gentle and kind as she looks on the surface. She is not a member of the Holy Fenglei sect. She may also be an alien of the Holy Fenglei sect. Several thoughts flashed through Wen Yuanqing's mind, and he was more afraid of Su Li when Hun was young, but he couldn't see things as deeply as his father. He just thought secretly that Sister Su controlled the life and death of ghosts. How awesome. Did you hear that? You are a scourge. Why should I let you live? Su Li said slowly, and the golden thunder arc lingered on her fingertips. Wen Yuanqing immediately retreated a few steps without a trace. Your Excellency, I'm useful. I'm absolutely useful. Hiju seemed to have grabbed onto a straw before drowning, and he desperately said, "The key figures of the 12 sects are all under my control. So long as Your Excellency Emperor gives the order, the 12 sects will be at your disposal." "Ho ho," when Yuanqing sneered and undermined him, "I taught you the secret method of controlling people, which is a method of our ghost clan. Since you are loyal to this senior, why don't you hand over the control jade token? That will show your sincerity, isn't it?" Hiju's face turned blue, and he stared at Wen Yuanqing. He transmitted the sound gloomily. Don't forget that you are also a ghost. She controls the divine thunder, and it's easy for her to kill us. If you help her now, you will die in the end. Wen Yuanqing scratched his ears, and said lightly, transmitting the sound in front of me, it seems that you are not going to be loyal to this Her Excellency Emperor. He Ju's face was completely gloomy, and he pinched an emerald jade token in his hand. The awe for Su Li in his eyes faded away, and he was full of desperate madness. Let me go, otherwise, I will crush the jade token. No one can get the right to control the 12 sect. When Yuanqing sneered, thousand-faced ghost, it seems that you are old, and your memory is not very good. Let me help you recall. The means of our ghost clan usually have a back door, and only our ghost clan can control it. If I haven't got out of trouble, you can do whatever you want. But in front of me, do you want to die together with me? No way. He Ju's pupils shrank suddenly, and he was shocked. At the moment when he was distracted, the thunder in Kang Lei's cave poured down, and burned He Ju into ashes in the blink of an eye. Jingle, the emerald jade token fell to the ground, and automatically flew into Su Li's hand. When Yuanqing calmed down, and said calmly, there is no back door in the means of our ghost clan. What we did just now was to deceive the thousand-faced ghost, so you can use this jade token at ease. Su Li glanced up at Wen Yuanqing's tense face, and said with a chuckle, of course, I know the means of the ghost clan. You don't have to explain. Seeing this, Wen Hun suddenly realized, it turns out that it was all a trap set by my sister and my father. Thinking of the word father, Wen Hun suddenly became more like a thief, and shrank back without a trace. Although he hadn't accepted the sudden appearance of father, he thought in his heart that no one would find it. Insi was dumbfounded when he saw this scene. He Ju was still alive and kicking a moment ago, but in the blink of an eye, he was the only one left. I heard that your flesh and blood can enhance the soul? Su Li put away the jade token, and then asked. Insi was stunned, and immediately nodded wildly, yes. My flesh and blood can enhance the soul. As long as I don't die, I can be reborn. As soon as he finished speaking, when Yuanqing said faintly, he is lying. Insi's flesh and blood are useless. What they provide to the disciples of the immortal cultivation sect is the flesh and blood of another mysterious ghost. If you eat too much of that flesh and blood, you will become a ghost and become their food. Those of the human clan that they let go have been brainwashed long ago in order to go down the mountain for him. They bring new potential food. Insi was suddenly frightened. How do you know? The ghost clan has a talent called Virtual Eye, which can see all the scenes within 100 miles. This is the most useless talent in the ghost clan. When Yuanqing grinned when he said this, you never set up the isolation matrix when you talk with the thousand-faced ghost. After hundreds of years, it is enough for me to know all your secrets. After that, when Yuanqing turned his eyes and said to Su Li, this time, what I said is true. Su Li raised her eyebrows, and the thunder and lightning poured down from the cave. Even for the revenge of Wen Hun. I never intend to let them live. Su Li curled her lips, what I said is also true. Wen Yuanqing, in the belly of Yin Mountain, when Yuanqing took Su Li and Wen Hun to a bloody mountain of flesh. This is the place where Insi and others collect flesh. I heard that the owner of the immortal cultivation sect here, before when Yuanqing finished his words, he suddenly felt a very cold pneuma coming to his face. Then a red and white dress flashed by. The little girl stood in front of the mountain of flesh with a red face and cried, don't look at it. When Yuanqing stared at her slightly. This little girl, no. The pneuma of the little ghost was exactly the same as that of the mountain of flesh. Su Li laughed out, it turns out that this is your original body. You are actually turned into meat. The little girl was immediately anxious, and tears of blood flowed down from her eyes. Don't laugh. The mountain of flesh was taken away by the little girl as expected. Although she didn't know where Hong Baizhu put it, it didn't prevent her from knocking it into Kang Lei's cave, so Su Li didn't bother to investigate it. Su Li didn't want to stay here any longer, and directly left the mess of the immortal cultivation sect to Wen Yuanqing. Within 8 years, I want to see a ghost sect that I can use. Wen Yuanqing was shocked, and his eyes brightened. I will live up to your expectations. At the gate of the soul cultivation sect. Wen Hun watched Su Li go away, and his expression was still a little blank. In just 2 days, his life had undergone earth-shaking changes. It was like a dream. Wen Yuanqing smiled and said slowly, people's fate is changeable, like the clouds in the sky and the dogs in the sky. Don't feel confused. We can have a promising future if we follow her. But I have entered the erosion period, and I will degenerate into a ghost in a year at most. How can I talk about the future? Wen Hun was very frustrated. Wen Yuanqing was suddenly stunned. He sniffed and couldn't help frowning. My senses can't be wrong. Although you have a trace of the smell of the red dress, it is still far from becoming a ghost. Even if you keep practicing Ghost Chapter, it will take at least 200 years. How can there be the erosion period? Did I make a mistake? Wen Hun was relieved when he heard the words, and then said strangely, but my body has become inexplicably relaxed recently, and I don't feel tired. Wen Yuanqing smiled slightly. Obviously, he was a gloomy ghost, but his smile was gentle. Someone has helped you to recuperate secretly. Think about what you have refined or eaten recently. Wen Hun was still not used to communicating with his father, who suddenly appeared. He scratched his head subconsciously, and then the time when he ate in Su Li's courtyard for 3 meals a day suddenly flashed in his mind. I see. He was suddenly enlightened, and then he felt warm and bitter in his heart. Those days will never come again. Chapter 530. Remember, in 1 second wonderful pop-up window free reading, you've finally come back. Hua Yang came over and rolled her eyes. Then she asked, Yang Zai and others have been waiting outside the mountain gate for 2 months, but you didn't summon them. Is the rumor about the immortal cultivation sect true or false? Su Li raised her hand and showed the jade rune. It was rare for her to show off. I do it in person. There is no reason to fail. Speaking of this, she raised her eyebrows. Ask Zai and others to come back. I have subdued the immortal cultivation sect, but its nature is a bit special, and it is not suitable for other people in the sect to contact. Special? Hua Yang raised an eyebrow. Su Li said, Yang, do you believe that there are ghosts in the world? Ghost? Hua Yang was puzzled. It's nothing more than a secular saying. It's a hallucination caused by mortals being contaminated with yin qi. You and I are cultivators. How can we believe this? Su Li shook her head and smiled, saying faintly, maybe for today's clear Qingshui circle, you are right, but there are ghosts in the world. At least there are many in the immortal cultivation sect. If you are curious, you can go and have a look. Hua Yang felt her hair stand on end, and a layer of goosebumps appeared all over her body. She laughed and scolded, I haven't seen you for 2 months, and your ghost story has improved. You can even fool me. Su Li was helpless. What I said is true. Only a ghost would believe you. Hua Yang rolled her eyes. I'm going to inform Yang Zai. As for going to the immortal cultivation sect, forget it. It's tiring enough to help you manage this small territory. Since the immortal cultivation sect has surrendered to us, we will see each other in the future. Hua Yang snorted and floated away. Su Li couldn't help laughing and ignored her. She looked down at the jade rune in her hand that had recognized her as the owner. The jade talisman was real. This had been verified by the Black Lotus, so there could be no mistake. After thinking for a while, Su Li sent a majestic thought to the jade token. Everyone, come see me. In the wilderness where spiritual energy was sparse. The mountain winds howled, and all that entered their eyes was a desolate place. This was a place that cultivators wouldn't even be willing to linger for a second. On the peak of the mountain, a black lotus quietly bloomed at the corner of the beautiful woman's eyes. Her delicate face carried a coldness that did not match her age. The strong wind blew, and her white dress fluttered. It was as if she was about to ascend to heaven in the next moment. Suddenly, shua 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 shua, streaks of light rapidly approached and descended, turning into 12 faces of varying heights, young and old. Without exception, all of them were at the early stage of soul formation. With this number, the immortal cultivation sect could at least enter the top 3 of the 25 sects. You're all quite punctual. Did you come together? A sweet and clear voice rang in everyone's ears. Su Li turned around with a light smile. When everyone saw that the person who had summoned them was not He Ju, but a woman, all the guesses that they had made on the way here were instantly overturned. Everyone's faces were filled with uncertainty. Su Li squinted her long and narrow eyes, and her curly eyelashes trembled. She said in a cold voice, "I am your new master. Although you are controlled, you still have your wits. I like it very much." New master. The only red-dressed female cultivator among the 12 people stepped forward. Her breasts were like billowing waves, and her red lips were like fire. Her beauty was boundless. She looked up and down at Su Li's excessively young face, covered her mouth and chuckled, revealing a pair of sharp eyes. "Little sister, did you steal the jade rune from somewhere? How dare you call us here? Aren't you afraid of losing your life?" As soon as she said this, the 5 people behind her immediately laughed. Their eyes became unkind. Su Li couldn't help but raise her eyebrows, as if she didn't realize that she had fallen into a dangerous situation. She said with a smile, "It seems that the 12 of you are not united. You are the leader of this half, so..." She turned her eyes to an ordinary-looking tall and thin practitioner standing in front of her on the other side. The tall and thin practitioner's eyes flashed, and he knelt on one knee without hesitation. "Naimingja pays respect to the new master." Ha 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 ha. Before Su Li said anything, she heard the woman with makeup trembling with laughter. "Naimingja, you are really shameless. New master. I'll let her become your dead master immediately." Before she finished her words, the woman with makeup suddenly turned cold, and her black claws instantly grabbed Su Li's head, as if the latter's skull would be crushed in the next moment. "Stop!" Naimingja shouted angrily, but his hands didn't move, and the 5 people behind him also didn't move. Su Li tilted her head and smiled. She didn't move. Boom! The woman with makeup spat out blood and flew backward. She turned into a red shadow and shot out like a cannonball. She hit a long pit and didn't stop until she hit several feet into the mountain wall. Her whole body hung on the mountain wall, and her pneuma instantly weakened. Everyone behind the female practitioner with makeup changed their expressions. "What happened just now?" Naimingja swallowed his saliva and said loudly, "Master's cultivation is unparalleled, and she is mighty." Before he finished his words, Su Li waved her hand, and the latter also spat out blood and flew backward. He was swept out dozens of feet away. Now, the other 5 people who were still glad that they stood on the right side also turned pale and froze in the same place. The female practitioner with makeup got up first. Her clothes were ragged, and her face was swollen. She kept coughing up blood. Naimingja crawled for a long time, but he couldn't get up. He was more seriously injured than the female practitioner with makeup. "You two, one is a brainless fool, and the other is a fence-sitter. I don't like either of you." Su Li pinched the jade token with both hands and shook it. Her tone was full of disgust. "If you hadn't lurked in the 25 sects for a long time, I wouldn't have kept you alive. You should be glad that you still have some value." As soon as she said that, an invisible pressure shrouded them. Everyone lowered their heads and didn't dare to look directly at Su Li, especially those who laughed just now. They were afraid that they would be seriously injured in an instant like Naimingja and Su Li. Su Li raised her eyebrows. "Someone come out to speak." Everyone was stunned. One of the people of Mingja's faction stood out and decisively knelt down. "Wang Yuan, the law enforcement elder of Wanli sect, greets the new master." With him taking the lead, the rest of the people immediately knelt down one by one. Hu Dao, the 4th elder of the inner branch of Chuanyun sect, greets the new master. Cheng Shahai, the 3rd elder of the inner branch of Tianhu Valley, greets the new master. Su Li nodded gently and wrote down everyone's names one by one. Then she flicked her fingers, and 2 green lights went into the bodies of the 2 people who were still kneeling under the mountain wall. "Which sect are you from?" The female practitioner with makeup immediately felt that her injury was mostly healed. She was in awe and bowed down respectfully. "Master, I am Mu Hong, the deputy lord of Wanli sect." "Oh, no wonder you dare to fight as soon as you meet. It turns out that you are in a high position in the 3rd sect." Su Li ridiculed. Mu Hong immediately lowered her head in shame. "I dare not. I was reckless. Why don't you dare? I think you are very daring. Su Li teased and her eyes fell on Naimingja. So, you must be the senior of Liang's sect, the fourth sect? I dare not. Naimingja's scalp was numb. He quickly lowered his head and said in a timid voice, I am the deputy lord of Liang's sect. I have a little power in my hand. I am willing to go through fire and water for you. That's enough. I don't like hypocrisy. Su Li waved her hand and looked indifferent. I don't care whether you are sincere or hypocritical. You are in a high position all year round, and it is normal for you to have some thoughts. But in front of me, Su Li said coldly, you'd better put it away. Everyone was shocked and kept quiet out of fear. In 8 years, I will unify the Jiuzhou region. At that time, if you can still obey me, I don't mind making each of you a lord. Su Li casually dropped a bomb in everyone's heart. Mu Hong's first thought was that she didn't believe it. Chapter 531. 34 Chinese Network, in 1 second wonderful pop-up window free reading. After returning to Ni sect again, Su Li rarely had leisure time. She took out the harvest in Jiuli region and cooked a few delicacies for Hua Yang and others. Although the memory of Yang Zai, Dongfang Wuxue and others in the reincarnation mirror did not fade, they never thought that Su Li would still be willing to cook after returning to Qingshui Circle. Then, they ate to their heart's content. After all, they didn't have this blessing in the world of the reincarnation mirror. As for LVU and others who didn't know Su Li's origin, they were even more amazed. Su Li was happy to see everyone's reaction. After a few days, they were finally interrupted by the arrival of a person. The main hall covered with green tiles on the top of the mountain was open on all sides. The breeze was gentle, and it was comfortable and pleasant. The woman with heavy makeup carefully walked into the main hall. Looking at the casual and simple layout in the main hall, she felt out of place and couldn't help but feel surprised. How could the new master, who was so overbearing and surly, live in such a refined and elegant place? What are you thinking about? The woman with heavy makeup heard the familiar voice and immediately shivered. She turned to look at the small door connected to the back hall and saw Su Li coming with a smile. Different from the fierce dress of the heavy soul black robe in the past, Su Li wore a pure white gauze dress. She walked silently and looked like a gentle fairy who was above the world. The woman with heavy makeup had already learned what kind of fierce face was hidden under the delicate appearance, so she immediately knelt down. Slave Mu Hong pays respect to the master. Su Li nodded gently and opened her red lips slightly. In the future, you don't need to call yourself slave or master. Just call me master. Since you come to me, you must have gained something, right? Mu Hong only thought it was a means for the new master to win people's hearts. She was calm and quickly replied, Master, I have stayed in Wanli sect for hundreds of years and only met the Grand Elder once. After that, the Grand Elder practiced in isolation. If it is not related to the survival of the sect, he will not come out. There is no Elders' Union in Wanli sect, and the real power is in the hands of the Deputy Lords and the Lord. I am the Chief Deputy Lord, so I only need to control the Lord to control the Wanli sect. Su Li nodded with appreciation in her eyes. It's rare for you to be so frank when you are in this position. Mu Hong lowered her head and her eyes flashed. Then, she said, Sir, you're wrong. You're a strong cultivator. The cultivation world is a place where the strong prey on the weak. If you're not strong enough, you can only be trampled on. Although I, Mu Hong, am arrogant, I respect the strong. You are even more powerful than the Grand Elder of Wanli sect. With you as my backer, why wouldn't I be happy? He, Su Li chuckled and said meaningfully, I hope you are telling the truth. Mu Hong's heart tightened. She raised her head and said, I'm here to show my loyalty. Although the 12 of us are the pawns of the immortal cultivation sect, we have already formed our own camps. I have also placed a lot of spies in the other 11 sects. Naimingja seems to have a sign of betrayal. At present, I don't know whether he has exposed your existence. This matter is critical. You must deal with it carefully. There's such a thing. Su Li still smiled. I'll arrange someone to deal with this matter. You stay for a while, and I'll send someone to meet you. Then, Su Li waved her hand and walked away. I still have a dish on the stove. It can't be burned. Seeing that the new master didn't seem to take her words seriously at all, Mu Hong's heart sank. She suddenly began to doubt whether she had taken the right step. It's no wonder. Anyone who controls the power of the 12 sects will inevitably be proud and look down on other sects. But the distribution of the power of the 25 sects is uneven. If Yushu sect knew in advance and cooperated with Naimingja, Mu Hong was secretly disappointed. Not long after, strange footsteps sounded. Yang Zai walked over with a cold expression. A familiar pressure came over to Mu Hong, which made her feel a chill in her heart and gave birth to a little hope. The person who met her was not a simple person. Burp, an ear-piercing burp broke the silence, and Mu Hong's solemn expression instantly became sluggish. Yang Zai was speechless and looked embarrassed. Damn it, the dishes you made are so delicious that I accidentally ate more. LVU, who was observing in secret, almost laughed out loud. You called that a little bit more. If you hadn't eaten indiscriminately, the master wouldn't have made another pot. Ahem, with a cough, Yang Zai forcibly covered up the embarrassment and said coldly, follow me. Mu Hong followed Yang Zai to a side hall. The decoration of the hall was extremely simple. There were shelves on all sides of the walls, on which a large number of jade slips were piled. They were wrapped by the isolation tactical matrix. In the center, there was a set of wooden tables and chairs. Sit down. Mu Hong sat down and was about to emphasize the importance of Naimingja's matter. Yang Zai waved his hand and said, don't worry. I've got the news from the master about what you said. It's not urgent. The Lord of Liang sect has been out recently. As you said, Naimingja will definitely choose to contact the first elder of Liang sect. I'll ask Dong Minglan. Mu Hong was stunned. Dong Minglan? Wasn't she the first elder of Liang sect? Ask her directly. Before she could ask, Yang Zai had already flicked out a crystal-clear communication talisman and disappeared into the void. Not long after, a similar communication jade talisman was sent back, and a familiar voice sounded through the jade talisman. This female cultivator's voice, which was very majestic in Mu Hong's memory, was gentle at the moment. Deputy Lord Yang, it's true. Naimingja has been controlled by me. I will never let him affect the master's plan. So, how should we deal with Naimingja? After hearing this, Mu Hong finally understood. No wonder the new master was not anxious at all. It turned out that Liang sect had been infiltrated long ago. Dong Minglan is the master's person. Then Liang sect. Mu Hong remembered what Su Li said before and couldn't help but ask, didn't the master say that she only controlled 11 sects? Yang Zai raised his eyebrows, which was very similar to Su Li's usual way. The master did completely control only 11 sects, but she never said that we only infiltrated 11 sects. Mu Hong was shocked by the huge amount of information and couldn't breathe smoothly. Her pupils shrank and she tentatively asked, then the lord of my Wanli sect? Yang Zai smiled, not yet. Apart from you, there are only a few mediocre vice sect masters who have submitted. Mu Hong felt cold in her heart. Could she believe this sentence? She thought she had seen everything about the new master, but after coming today, she found that what she saw turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg. It's ridiculous that I was wavering before. Mu Hong thought with lingering fear. If she was not firm, she might end up like Naimingja. Relax. Yang Zai smiled and began to comfort Mu Hong very familiarly. The master is not as terrible as you think. Although you are controlled by the master, you still have your sanity. You are lucky. As long as you don't betray us, there are many benefits. You will know in the future. Mu Hong forced a smile. She nodded, but her pale face still betrayed her inner uneasiness. Yang Zai was not in a hurry. He had done this kind of work most of these years, and he had long been familiar with it. He let Mu Hong go back first and find a chance to trick the lord out. When the Wanli sect fell into his hands, Mu Hong couldn't do anything. Thinking of this, Yang Zai reached out and waved his hand. A register flew out of the shelf, on which there were densely packed names. Yang Zai turned to the last page and started to write. Mu Hong, Huishan Realm. Although she has some courage, Her state of mind is deviated. She can barely be regarded as the third class. Whether she will be cultivated in the future depends on observation. After drawing 3 red circles, Yang Zai threw away the pen, stood up, and rubbed his stomach, muttering, "Working is really exhausting. Forget it, I'll go to Sir's place and have a bowl of rice, just one bowl." After Mu Hong went back, she tried her best to trick the Lord of the Wanli sect out. With the cooperation from both inside and outside, it didn't take much effort for Su Li to take over the sect. It was worth mentioning that the Lord of the Wanli sect was tough and refused to yield. Su Li could only make him a member of the Soul Tactics. When Mu Hong saw this scene, she became even more terrified. The thoughts in her mind had long been thrown out of her mind. With Mu Hong taking the lead, the remaining 10 people followed her example and tried their best to trick the lord of their sect. They even competed with each other in speed, for fear that they would be at a disadvantage because they were too slow. As for Nai Mingjia, he was naturally in the hands of Dong Minglan and went to the place where he should go. Deputy Lord Nai has not returned since he went down the mountain. Now his soul tablet is broken. I am afraid that he has met with an accident. Jojo region is in troubled times. Don't spread this matter to prevent accidents. Dong Minglan said cautiously. All the elders of the Liang sect nodded one after another. The Lord sighed in his heart, but he agreed on the surface. What Minglan said is right. The Jojo region is in a precarious situation. We should integrate the fighting power of the sect in case of a sudden war. As soon as the words came out, Dong Minglan narrowed her eyes and nodded with a smile. Lord, you are farsighted. We will obey you. Seeing that the 2 big shots of the sect all nodded, the rest of the elders naturally did not dare to raise any objections and voted in favor. Your Excellency, it doesn't matter if you can't understand me now. I have chosen a clear path. From now on, you and I are in the same boat. Please take care of me. Hearing the transmitted sound from the woman beside him, the Lord closed his eyes and fell into complete silence. Since then, in just 8 months, Su Li had taken action 12 times. She completely eliminated the remaining stubborn forces and completely unified the 23 sects of the Jojo region into a force. And Mu Hong finally knew that there were 19 sects that the new master had infiltrated. Even without their appearance, the new master would do this, but it would take a little more time. Look, Yang, I thought it would take 10 years, but it only took me 3 years to achieve this. Su Li sat by the lake in the back mountain and smiled like a flower. Hua Yang fiddled with the spiritual plant in her hand, looked up and smiled helplessly. She didn't speak. She was afraid that Su Li would be arrogant if she praised her. However, there was still unconcealable amazement in Hua Yang's eyes. Her bosom friend could always accomplish miracles that ordinary people could not imagine. When will we take action next? Su Li stopped smiling, and her dark eyes were dim. Don't worry. I will practice in isolation soon. Hua Yang was stunned, and then she smiled brightly. Her usual gentle tone revealed a rare murderous intent. The day you come out of isolation is the day we attack. Chapter 532. Book Maze Lu Org, wonderful pop-up window free reading. In a cave 100 meters underground in the depths of an unknown barren mountain in Jojo region, it was so dull that it was difficult to breathe. Su Li glanced around at the seclusion retreat that she had opened up for half a day. Although she should not be disturbed when she practiced in the back mountain of Ni sect, she would never pin her hopes on the word should because of her cautious temperament. Without thinking too much, Su Li narrowed her beautiful eyes, and her eyes became sharp. She stretched out her right hand and drew a circle. Quietly, the azure blue luster crossed the dazzling trace along her fingertips, and the starry gate appeared again. Compared with the previous 2 times, Su Li's heart was extremely calm. This time, she was more prepared than ever. Her actual combat power had already exceeded her Jindan stage cultivation by 3 levels, and she also had several means to help her. If even she couldn't pass this threshold, then the cultivators who chose this path in ancient times would have died long ago. Don't be careless. Even a lion fights a rabbit with all its strength. I don't need to remind you that you have grown to this level. Su Li nodded gently and took off the treasures such as Black Lotus ring. She said in a rare serious tone, "Take care of the guys in Kang Lei's cave. I will be back soon." Black Lotus rolled his eyes as a response. Su Li smiled slightly, and without hesitation, she turned around and disappeared into the starry gate. It was cold rain in the early morning on the long street of Yunjing. The cold rain fell on Su Li's dazed face, which made her shiver involuntarily. Then she came to her senses. Su Li struggled to climb up from the collapsed and broken wall. She saw the familiar low bluish-gray brick wall, the dilapidated courtyard, the bright bloodstains on the grass, and the approaching figure. Her pupils suddenly shrank. You can still keep so calm in the face of death. You do have some skills. No wonder the young master will be fascinated by you and fall in love with you. Ling Xian, who was supposed to die, walked out gracefully, and her tone was as familiar as ever. This unforgettable familiar scene had long been engraved in her soul. Even if she already knew that everything was an illusion, she could not erase it. It was on this day that her life had undergone earth-shaking changes. I clearly entered the starry gate. Why do you want me to see these? Could it be that the Chuangxing path this time is an inner demon? Su Li thought gloomily. Ling Xian had approached. The fourth elder of the Enmore cult should appear next, and then Su Yu should appear. However, what happened next was far beyond her imagination. Stop, Ling Xian. Along with a furious roar, a figure at the end of the long street approached from afar. In a few flashes, he had arrived. Ling Li picked up the petite girl who was as light as a feather and held her tightly in his arms. His spiritual power poured into her body as if it was free. He always had a gentle face, but the anxiety in his eyes could burn through the sky. Sect Master? The fourth elder walked over and was stunned. What's going on? He looked at Ling Xian inquiringly. However, Ling Xian, who was aggressive just now, was avoiding his eyes. It seemed that she wanted to leave. The fourth elder was no fool, and he immediately understood what was going on. His gaze turned cold, and he moved his feet, faintly sealing off the latter's movements. It's my carelessness. Looking at the girl who seemed to have fainted in his arms, Ling Li's eyes were full of self-blame. After confirming that Su Li's life was not in danger, he raised his head and looked at Ling Xian. His face instantly became cold, and his lips were like a thin piece of paper, like a cold blade. You are very good. Ling Xian took a deep breath and said righteously, I did it for the young master. You are the chosen one. How noble you are. How can you marry such a commoner? That's simply tarnishing you. Ling Mo, slap her. Slap. Ling Mo withdrew his hand expressionlessly. Looking at Ling Xian's astonished face, he said lightly, You stink. The stench of jealousy could even be smelled by him. Ling Xian's face turned pale, and her lips trembled. She stared at Ling Li and wanted to say something, but finally, she said nothing and left in a panic. Child. Ling Mo walked to Ling Li and asked him. The meaning in his eyes was self-evident. Ling Li closed his eyes and felt the softness in his arms. He was more and more angry, but his mind was extremely sober. He said calmly, Fourth Elder, do you know your crime? At this moment, Fourth Elder had received the sound transmitted by Third Elder, and he was extremely regretful. Hearing Ling Li's words, he immediately lowered his head. I listened to the holy girl's lies, and I know my crime. Then, the holy girl Ling Xian tried to kill Madam Hierarch but failed. She has committed a heinous crime. You will be responsible for hunting her down, regardless of life or death. Fourth Elder was shocked. He looked up and saw the soberness and firmness in Ling Li's eyes. He thought of the sound transmitted by Third Elder and made up his mind. Yes, sir. In the east courtyard of the Ling mansion, there were all kinds of holy things for healing injuries in the large and exquisite wing room. I really can't eat anymore. On the bed, Su Li leaned on the porcelain pillow and reluctantly pushed away the tonic sent to her mouth. But Ling Li pulled a long face and was stubborn like a smelly and hard stone. No. You haven't recovered yet. Doctors don't treat themselves. You have to listen to me. Su Li's eyes softened, and she finally picked up the soup and drank it. Ling Li's face became better, and the love in his eyes almost melted. He said softly, "Good girl, I will deal with the chores of the cult, and I will come to accompany you soon." Su Li nodded. Ling Li helped her lie down, and then he left reluctantly. The room was quiet again. Su Li was silent for a moment in front of the pink gauze curtain above her head. Then she reluctantly sat up, opened the lining, and gently pressed the scab wound. Hiss! The pain came to her nerves. Su Li took a light breath, and her eyes were full of self-mockery. What is this? The other possibility of time may be better. Then what will happen when this world is broken? Su Li pondered. She stayed in the Ling mansion for 2 months for healing. In addition to dealing with the arrival of Lord Rui, Su Yu and others, she gained something. According to what Black Lotus said, although the test of Chuangxing Path is difficult, it is not difficult for me. But I haven't found a way to break the deadlock so far. It is likely that something unexpected happened in Chuangxing Path. Everything that has happened in the past 2 months feels like it's real. It's like there really is such a branch of time, and I'm like I've taken over another branch of time to exist, and I still have my original memories. So, if I stay here, what will happen? What will be the final ending of me in this branch of time? Countless thoughts flashed through her mind, and she finally quieted down. Without the fateful twist, everything in this branch of time was developing in a good direction. Su Li thought for a long time and did not touch those who had life rings. In this timeline, she should not know such things as life rings. The consciousness in Mai Ruohan's mind was also deliberately ignored by her. She wanted to see how far the test of Chuangxing Path could go. With the secret help of the Linli building, the Enmore cult soon controlled nearly 80% of the forces of Dahan. The Dongfang family was a mere figurehead. With the help of the Wanjian sect, the Dongfang family in the spiritual circle could not play a big role. Finally, after weighing the gains and losses, the Enmore cult gave up the arrangement of the Dongfang family. As a result, Dahan finally came to the end. The change of dynasty. Ling Li, the useless third son of the Ling family, turned out to be the hierarch of the Enmore cult. He ascended the throne and changed the name of the country to Ling. Su Li, the owner of the Linli building, had great foresight and unparalleled wisdom. She was conferred the title of Empress Su, the motherly model of the world. The world was shocked. The whole secular world and the martial arts circle were in shock for several years. The light in Fang Yuan's eyes also completely dimmed in these years, leaving only a faint warmth. It's good that I can help you manage the Linli building. In the Linli building, Fang Yuan held a glass of wine and looked at the towering palace in the city center. He smiled bitterly. In Chuxiu Palace, Su Li, wearing a phoenix crown, was bright and charming. She held a brush in her hand and wrote a word on the rice paper. 6. Mammy Li was confused. She still used the previous title, Miss. What does it mean? Su Li closed her eyes and didn't say anything. She had been in this tributary of time for nearly 6 years. In the first few years, she acted according to her original temperament, and everything ran normally. But in order to make things go smoothly, she couldn't hold back and predicted the future several times. It also included that she frightened Jing Xin with words, so that she took the initiative to take action and fooled the existence of the outside world. But in the end, the truth could not be concealed. A false idea filled her mind. Even if she was paralyzed for 6 years, she was still sober, even more sober than ever. In the past 2 years, although she tried her best to cover it up, the premonition that the truth would be revealed became stronger. Li, why are you in a daze again? What are you thinking about? Ling Li, dressed in a dragon robe, strode with a smile. On his handsome face, he had sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. He slightly raised the corners of his mouth, exuding high spirits. In these years, he stayed with Su Li, but the love in his heart did not fade away. Instead, it became purer and purer like wine. There was no room for any other woman in his eyes. Su Li raised her head. At this moment, suddenly, boom, there was a loud explosion in the sky, as if bombarding on everyone's mind. Then Su Li felt a heat on her wrist, and the life ring, which had been lurking and motionless, lit up. She raised her head and saw Ling Li, who was full of astonishment, quickly faded away. She also heard the majestic words. The time is up. The trial is over. Come out. As soon as the voice fell, Su Li felt that the memory in her mind began to fade. The misery of the first life and the glory of the second life disappeared one after another. Su Li pursed her lips. Even if I have worked hard for 6 years, my memory will disappear after I go out. It seems that I will continue to be a slaughtered animal. While talking to herself, she laughed in a low voice. After all, it's just an illusion. After all, I still can't escape the old way of being used. So, it's not a bad thing to break the life ring in advance and put myself in a desperate situation. Su Li raised her head and stared at the sky, as if she was looking at the unknown existence again. I have seen enough. Crash. The sky suddenly broke. Chapter 533. 34 Chinese Net. In 1 second wonderful pop-up window-free reading. Even though the Hall of the Holy Girl had not been opened for nearly 1,000 years, the air was still not dull and exuded a faint fragrance. In the large quiet room, Su Li opened her eyes and looked down at the familiar white dress. The reincarnation mirror lay quietly in her hand, which was cold to the touch. Because of the role of the life ring, her memory should go back to before she entered the reincarnation mirror. But there seemed to be some accident, and her soul hidden in the depths was still very sober. Although the illusion of Chuangxing Path is very real, it can't affect me. Su Li looked at the details of the reincarnation mirror in her hand, which was the same as in her memory, that is to say, the dangerous test for me is actually too simple. Li. Suddenly, the door of the Hall of the Holy Girl was pushed open on both sides, and a weak figure hurried in. There was anxiety in the gentle female voice. Su Li raised her head and saw a pair of eyes full of worry and distress. She was pleasantly surprised, and her face became gentle. She called softly, "Master." Li. Mo Qin shouted with pity. She came to kneel down and buried Su Li in her chest. Her voice was choked with sobs. "It's over. Everything is over. As your master, I'm sorry." Su Li leaned quietly in the arms of the woman, and her eyes were gentle. She sighed softly, "Master, I also want to spend more time with you, but there is not enough time." Li, what are you talking about? Mo Qin was stunned and held Su Li's face. Those strong enemies no longer force us. What do you mean there is not enough time? Are you hurt? Let me see. Mo Qin's face changed slightly, and she became anxious, but was pushed away by Su Li. Everything you demonstrate now is just what I want to see, so, all you can do is steal the picture in my memory and outline a false picture. It's too low level. Su Li's words were sarcastic, but Mo Qin was more and more confused, and her tone became more anxious and worried. You little girl, what nonsense are you talking about? Everything is true. You have come out of the suffering reincarnation mirror. You are now the Yushu Holy Girl. You are the first senior of the young generation of Yushu sect. It doesn't matter if you want to continue lying to me. Su Li smiled slightly. Since the foundation of this world is my belief, then I only need to deceive myself. She stretched out her hand and pointed to Mo Qin's stunned face. Mo Qin, there are countless spies in Jiuzhou region. You have been lurking around me and observing me. Which holy sect are you from? Mo Qin was stunned. Su Li increased the suspicion in her heart and narrowed her eyes. Let me think about it. Those who can be with me must be at least one of the 4 holy sects, right? Coupled with the fact that he was a lackey of the Fate ancestor, it would be even easier to screen. Do I need to explain? My dear master. Mo Qin took a few steps back, and her face kept changing. Finally, she was completely gloomy and sighed. Su Li, isn't it good to live a muddled life? If it's what you want, then it's not good. Su Li smiled brightly, with bright eyes and white teeth. Holy sects, Fate ancestor, all of you deserve to die. Buzz tilde. The picture in front of her fluctuated for a moment and then returned to stability. Mo Qin's face became cold, self-consciousness awakened again. How troublesome. Looks like I can only brainwash them again. She reached out to grab Su Li. Her cultivation was far beyond that of ordinary practitioners in Jindan realm. Su Li tilted her head and smiled, whispering, "Now, I am the strongest in Qingshui circle." Boom. Mo Qin mixed with the fragments of the main hall and shot backward, smashing a large group of palaces. Yushu sect was in chaos in an instant. Fragments. Su Li flashed out of the fragments of the palace. Looking at the chaotic picture, her smile became more and more intense. If I think it really exists, then it is true. Now my cultivation can only be resisted by Fate Ancestor. I slaughtered the 25 sects in Jojo region, including the Immortal Cultivation Sect. I killed all the holy sects in Qingshui Circle, and blood flowed like a river. Lives were plunged into misery and suffering. Even the 4 peak holy sects were no match for me. Now, Xinglu, you evolve a Fate Ancestor for me. Let me see what kind of monster the Fate Ancestor is. As Su Li finished her words, the picture turned faster and faster. In the end, it finally couldn't keep up with the speed of Su Li's weaving and turned into chaos. Enough, stop. The deafening majestic voice bombarded Su Li's mind. Immediately, the chaos in front of her receded and turned into clarity. What entered his eyes was a familiar starry sky, as well as a graceful pink-clothed woman with a blurry face sitting on a throne. Su Li looked over. The corner of the lips under the veil of the glamorous woman seemed to move a little, and the voice sounded again. To be able to pass my test at such a young age. You, not bad. What's your name? Junior is just a nobody. My name is not worth mentioning. Senior is too kind. Su Li's eyes flashed, and she replied in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. The term Star Hall flashed in her memory. She didn't forget the last encounter in Star Hall. The admiration in the cold and elegant woman's eyes became more and more intense. In order to annoy her sworn enemy Yi Chushue, she casually arranged a killing trap for Su Li unexpectedly. She not only failed to kill the girl, but also let her get out of trouble in just 6 years, which really surprised her. Because of this, she took the test token from her subordinates and came to Star Path to see Su Li in person. Yi Chushue appreciated this girl, and it was not without reason. No wonder she took action personally last time. However, this time I robbed her. The cold and elegant woman narrowed her eyes and thought. She deliberately omitted the danger of the test and said in a rare gentle tone, "Are you willing to be my disciple?" Su Li showed a puzzled look in time. Senior is? The cold and elegant woman chuckled softly. Do you still remember the danger you encountered in Star Hall last time? If I didn't help you, you wouldn't be able to get to the present so easily. Su Li suddenly realized and said in surprise, "It turns out to be Senior Star Hall." She deliberately flattered, but her heart was cold. Although the last contact with the woman from Star Hall was extremely short, she was definitely not the same person as the cold and elegant woman she saw today. This woman would never expect that the woman from Star Hall not only saved her last time, but also answered her questions and had a short communication. This person pretended to be that female senior. Is it because she likes me and wants to take me as her disciple in advance? Su Li's thoughts flashed, but she had a premonition that it was absolutely not like this. The test of Star Path didn't leave a way out at all. If she hadn't been strangely able to keep sober all the time, she would definitely be lost in it. But even if she could keep the advantage, it still took her 6 years to break through. This person is malicious. Su Li's eyes were slightly fixed, but she didn't show it on the surface. She said respectfully, "Senior, can you answer my doubts? What is Star Hall? Last time I had a glimpse of it, it really made me confused. What's so difficult about it?" The cold and elegant woman saw that Su Li didn't seem to notice the trick at all. When she thought of the future when she met Yi Chushue, she felt a burst of joy in her heart. She said directly, "As long as you take me as your disciple, one day you will find that the so-called Qingshui Circle is just a backwater place. There are many ignorant people." Su Li had been in contact with Chimo Circle, so she naturally knew the truth that there was always someone better than her. But she still pretended to be shocked and didn't understand anything to attract the cold and elegant woman to continue talking. Star Hall is a big force in the starry sky. It is above many cultivation worlds. You should know that the starry sky and eternity are the ultimate pursuit of practitioners. You are like a frog at the bottom of a well, only in a small world. How dare you call yourself a practitioner? The cold and elegant woman snorted coldly, and her tone became gentle again. So, if you take me as your disciple, you will reach the sky in one step and enter the big force in the starry sky. From then on, you will get rid of the low-level struggle and have the qualification to strive for a higher goal. Why not? Senior, you are right. Su Li's eyes were full of excitement and yearning. I am willing to take you as my teacher. Ha 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 ha. When the cold and elegant woman heard this, she finally couldn't help laughing out loud. Good. Little girl, congratulations on making the best choice in your life. After that, she made a gesture, and a palm-sized jade box appeared from the starry sky and flew into Su Li's hand. This is the elixir and mental method I prepared for you. Due to the rules of the star path, I can't give you too much, but these are enough for you to practice to the realm of human immortals. When you step into the realm of human immortals, you can break the nothingness and pinch this method. I will only send someone to pick you up. Su Li took the jade box with both hands and lowered her head. Her voice was full of surprise and joy. I will follow your instructions, Master. Ha ha ha, very good. I look forward to your arrival. The cold and elegant woman waved her sleeves and disappeared in the star path. Soon after, the stargate appeared. Su Li took a deep look at the direction where the cold and elegant woman disappeared, and the expression on her face instantly disappeared. She put away the jade box and stepped into the stargate without stopping. Deep in the ground, the stargate flashed, and Su Li's figure reappeared. Black Lotus Ring, who had completely given up hope, suddenly quivered and shot out of the soil, falling into Su Li's hand. Su Li, you are still alive. Do you know how long it has been? 6 years. A whole 6 years. I almost went to find the next master. Su Li frowned and pressed Black Lotus back into the ring space. She said coldly, don't talk nonsense. Is there any accident in the arrangement of Jojo region? Black Lotus calmed down a little and felt that the force above his head was less. He came out and shook his head. For a practitioner, 6 years is nothing. Fortunately, you didn't mention the time of practicing in isolation. Everything in NI sect is normal. Su Li breathed a sigh of relief and immediately told Black Lotus about her encounter on the Chuangxing path. Black Lotus was instantly stunned. This. There really is a star hall. You knew it last time, but you didn't tell me. Black Lotus was very sad and indignant. He was silent for a moment and said, however, I always feel something is wrong. Do you really want to learn the practice method of the Star Hall? Just for a while. Su Li sealed the jade box and put it into the universe ring. She said with a faint smile, how can I practice something of unknown origin? Chapter 534. In the vast and borderless beautiful mountains and rivers, there was only a pink palace dotted among them. In the huge hall, the pink gauze curtain fluttered in the wind, and the smooth and clean ground was like a mirror, reflecting another world. On a soft chair covered with pure white fur, a woman in a pink gauze dress was lying lazily. Her eyes were half closed, and her breasts were half exposed. She was humming softly, and she was in a very good mood. At her feet, a handsome young man in a pink robe was carefully massaging her toes with a focused look. After a while, he raised his eyes and said in a serious tone, Master, do you really want to accept that ignorant female practitioner from the small world as an apprentice? The woman half opened her eyes, and there seemed to be a pink mist rippling in her eyes. In the eyes of the pink-robed young man, it became a soul-stirring beauty. She snorted softly and said with a smile, how could I like that little girl? She is the person that Yi Chushua likes. I'm disgusted. The sense of crisis in the eyes of the pink-robed young man faded away, and he smiled a little more. Then he asked in confusion, then you clearly gave her the mental method elixir. Who said that was the mental method elixir? The woman's tone turned cold, that's just a trick I left. If that little girl really has the ability to come to me, I'm afraid that she has become half a puppet of mine unknowingly. If I ask her to die, she won't even blink. At that time, I must humiliate Yi Chushua once. Speaking of this, the woman smiled again. That scene, just thinking about it makes me happy. The pink-robed young man also laughed when he heard the words, Master, no matter how angry Yi Chushua is, she will definitely not dare to do it. The woman snorted proudly. Of course, this is my bedroom. Even if she was promoted by Master Hong Luo and became the deputy hall master, the rules of the Star Hall still have to be followed. Before she finished her words, her face suddenly changed. Boom! Without warning, a sword light brighter than the starlight fell into the center of the pink palace like a meteorite. Accompanied by the screams of many male servants, the pink palace's restriction runes didn't stop it even for a moment. In the blink of an eye, it became a ruin under the impact of the sword light. The arc-shaped shock wave spread, the wind raged in the mountains and forests, and countless trees collapsed. One sword destroyed the palace. A figure flashed, and the woman in white suddenly appeared in the void. She held a sword in one hand and slowly descended. Her blue eyes were like ice that could not be melted. Shen Chunshui, get out here. Whoosh. The pink figure instantly shot out from the ruins, followed by the huge pink skull behind her. In the blink of an eye, the sky was illuminated pink. You destroyed my palace and killed my concubine. Yi. First. Snow. I'll tear you to shreds. Yi Chushue's blue eyes with sword light suddenly become serious. She doesn't step back but uses her sword to block. The skeleton magic weapon and the flying sword have collided for thousands of times in the blink of an eye. The shock wave brought by the collision soon sweeps away the beautiful mountains and rivers into bare barren hills. Shen Chunshui became more and more anxious. He spread his fingers and a pink skeleton zither appeared out of thin air. Seeing this, Yi Chushue frowned. She let go of the sword in her hand and let it return to her body automatically. Another icy giant sword slowly rose from behind. Shen Chunshui, you hurt my concubine, and I destroyed your palace. Now we are even. Yi Chushue's tone was calm. Without the tension before the war, you have to think about the consequences of using the forbidden weapon in the Star Hall. Shen Chunshui's pink eyes were full of anger and madness. Yi Chushue, only you are allowed to disturb my meditation, but I am not allowed to hurt you. There is no such rule in this world. She flicked her two fingers, and the skeleton zither in her hand made a series of strange sounds. Even if I am punished to go to the small world, I will seriously injure you today. 10,000 years. You are so stubborn. Yi Chushue shook her head. The giant sword behind her was shining with blue light. There was pity in her eyes. Even if the grade of your forbidden weapon is higher than mine, it depends on who uses it. Ah. Shen Chunshui was poked at his sore point, and he was almost crazy with anger. Yi Chushue, I will tear your mouth. She pressed her 10 fingers on the strings of the zither and flicked her fingers. The skull at the top immediately opened its mouth, protruding countless colorful arcs. Just looking at it would make people sink into it and be disturbed by countless inner demons and distracting thoughts. As the attack approached, Yi Chushue closed her eyes and suddenly opened them. 2 transparent sword lights slashed through in an instant, cutting off more than half of those silk threads in the blink of an eye. Qing Ming Sky! She shouted softly, and the wind and clouds in the sky changed. The starry sky became a world full of small ice blue swords. Almost at the same time, Shen Chunshui gnashed his teeth angrily. 3,000 pink swords. Countless skeletons flooded over, resisting the encirclement of the small ice blue swords, occupying half of the sky. Kill them. The skeletons turned into residual shadows and rushed over. They opened their mouths ferociously and bit the small swords one by one. Yi Chushue's eyes flashed, and thousands of small swords also turned into sword lights and shot out. Just the two of them actually fought with the intensity of tens of thousands of people. The aftermath of the continuous sweeping in the void thinned the foundation again and again, and finally, boom, the ground sank, and the sky fell and the earth cracked. Shen Chunshui and Yi Chushue were both deputy lords of the Star Hall. Neither of them could do anything to the other. The battle didn't last long. Finally, a lord came out of isolation and forced a stop. But the storm spread for a long time before it stopped. Until Shen Chunshui was sent to guard the Dingfeng Star Zone and Yi Chushue returned to the Star Hall area, no one mentioned it again. In the end, Sister Hong Luo has won this game of chess. Yi Chushue returned to her own bedroom. Seeing the red figure in the spiritual realm, her tense expression suddenly relaxed. The beautiful figure in the spiritual realm let out a faint smile, but did not turn around. Fortunately, you got the test token this time. It proves that you first contacted the junior in the small world, so you won slightly. Shen Chunshui is temporarily exiled. You can concentrate on improving your strength. Don't be careless. Beichen's people will not give up. I understand. Yi Chushua nodded and sighed. It's a pity that the junior was implicated by me. With Shen Chuanshui's mind, he must have left some means. I hope she can be blessed. The beautiful figure in the mirror was silent for a moment, and said, there are so many small worlds. You only have a mark of the star path. If you want to find that girl in a short time, even I can't do it. This matter can only depend on her own luck. We can't help her. Yi Chushua understood this, and couldn't help but sigh again. After Su Li came out of isolation, she returned to Ni sect to meet Hua Yang and others, and then she isolated again. This time, the isolation only lasted for 3 days. 3 days later, Su Li sat in the quiet room and looked inside her pubic region. On the 18th grade Black Lotus, Su Li sat in it in the shape of a baby. She looked solemn, but under the black wrapping, she looked a bit evil. Yuanying realm. This is a realm that I didn't reach in my last life. Su Li saw the gurgling power of Yuanying in her body, with the unique jade-like feeling of Sueyu tactics. The grey film buried under the surface of the skin seemed to have thickened to the thickness of a hair. The total amount had increased, and the area that could be covered was also larger. How much strength can the new grey film make me exert without being discovered by the natural law needs new experiments. Coincidentally, Su Bai hasn't eaten for a long time. My physical body hasn't changed. It seems that my realm is low. The breakthrough of the immortal realm has no effect on my physical body. The evil ghost has a new change, which is related to the Black Lotus. I still need to explore it. All kinds of thoughts flashed in her mind, and Su Li got up and opened the door. Hua Yang, Yang Zai, Lvu, Dongfang Wushua and others were all there. Su Li slightly tilted her chin, showing a bright smile. Everyone, let's go. After this, Jojo region will be our world. The blue stone was covered with thick moss, which was slippery when walking on it. Her nose was full of the smell of wet grass. Su Li looked up and saw the familiar mountain gate. She raised her lips and stepped up. The plan had been made 10 years ago. In the past 10 years, she just gathered everyone's efforts to improve the framework. When it was finally implemented, she was very idle. The first step was to launch all the secret forces and temporarily pinch the eyes of all the holy sects. The spies of the holy sects had long been transparent in the eyes of the lords. In the past, they just didn't touch them for the sake of the face of the holy sects. Now they had a new master, who was absolutely powerful and overbearing. Naturally, they had to obey the master's orders. After the first step, the 23 sects used all the secret forces to infiltrate into Zihon sect and Yushu sect at the same time, and temporarily controlled all the people who were suspected to be the spies of the holy sect. After 2 steps, the 23 sects had a short blank period. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the 23 sects, which had been prepared for a long time, were divided into 2 groups and attacked the 2 sects at the same time. The Immortal Cultivation sect divided the ghosts into 2 groups, and each group went to help the 2 sect. Many ants could bite an elephant to death. A sect faced the old guise of 12 sects at the same time. Even if it had a deep foundation, it couldn't bear it at all, not to mention the existence of ghosts, which was incomprehensible to practitioners. Therefore, the 2 sects were stunned by the sudden invasion. They only held on for 2 days, and were on the verge of being breached. What's going on? Who can tell me why the 23 sects attacked our Yushu sect and Zihon sect at the same time? In the last line of defense, the eyes of Yaro Shuangya, the current lord of Yushu sect, were red, and most of his soft black hair turned white in 2 nights. The atmosphere in the whole hall was tense, like a string that was about to break. It's not a big deal if a strong enemy attacks. Our Yushu sect has prepared for a rainy day and prepared a lot of records. But every time we counterattack, the route is calculated, and we are completely annihilated. The sect is so shaky. Who is adding insult to injury? Who is the mole? The whole hall was silent. Many elders looked at each other, and they were all at a loss. They were elders who had stayed in Yushu sect for more than 1,000 years. How could they be the mole? Lord, the people in the sect are shaken now. It's not the time to talk about this. Li Hai, the deputy lord, stood up and said. Yarrow Shuangya took a deep breath and barely calmed down. You are right. We should be more united in the face of the enemy. But the 12 sects joined forces, and the old ancestor was seriously injured. The spies we sent to seek help from the holy sects have no news. What should we do now? Everyone's heart sank, and they fell into a long silence. Maybe we can make a deal with the immortal tea tree to unlock its seal. Someone suggested, and then the hall fell into a longer silence. The demon tree looked kind on the surface, but it was actually sealed here by the founder. If the seal was really unlocked, no one knew if the demon tree would turn against them and turn to deal with them. Mo Qin stood among many elders of alchemy, but there was not much sadness in her heart. Maybe this is retribution, she thought in her heart. Chapter 535. At this point, we have no choice. Li Hai looked dignified. He looked at Yarrow Shuangya and said solemnly, Lord, we can't resist the joint forces of the 12 sects. We can only rely on external forces. If we don't use the trump card of immortal tea plant, you are the only one left to wake up Grand Elder. Impossible. Yarrow Shuangya interrupted Li Hai's words with a gloomy look. Grand Elder is at a critical moment, which is related to the rise of our sect. We must not disturb him. As soon as these words came out, many elders were worried at the same time. What should we do? The elder in charge of the supply of spiritual stones looked worried. Even if the tactical matrix for protecting the sect shrinks to the extreme, it can only last for half a day. Can we only surrender? Yarrow Shuangya saw that people were unstable. Even if his heart was as heavy as a mountain, he still looked calm and his tone was steady. Our Yushu sect has stood for thousands of years. How can it be defeated by a group of mobs? The war is inevitable. You wait to recuperate first. At that time, I will have a way to deal with the combat power of Grand Elder. Hearing Yarrow Shuangya's words, everyone breathed a sigh of relief and said in unison, Lord is wise. However, no one knew how many people actually believed it. I'll take someone to check the tactical matrix. Li Hai's eyes flashed, and he retreated. Deputy Lord Li, wait. I'll go with you. The elder in charge of the supply of spiritual stones hurriedly followed him out of the hall. Seeing this, the Lord looked slightly relaxed. At the critical moment, there were still people in the sect who could be relied on. However, when he thought of Grand Elder, his mood was gloomy again. Over the years, others didn't know why Yushu sect was strong, but he knew it as the Lord. Grand Elder had disappeared as early as more than 2,000 years ago. If he hadn't climbed up the holy sects in time, Yushu sect would have been swallowed by Zihon sect. How could it still maintain prosperity? All the spies of the holy sects have been removed, and even the elder in charge of contacting the holy sects has disappeared. Who on earth is so generous? Yarrow Shuangya calculated. Facing the unknown enemy, he felt more and more powerless. Unconsciously, he came to a palace. Looking up at the words Holy Girl Hall, he felt inexplicably cold. Bad luck. Yarrow Shuangya's face darkened. He waved his sleeves, turned around, and left. This scene clearly fell into the eyes of Fang Ling, who was sitting upright in the hall, her expression as usual. After the chaos 1,000 years ago, the position of the holy girl of Yushu sect had long been regarded as a jinx. If it were not for the order of holy sects that the holy girl was required to preside over the necessary rituals, the position of the holy girl would have been revoked long ago. After she came back from that world, although she took over senior sister apprentice Mai's class, she was also suspected of being a soul snatcher, so she was always guarded against by the master and the lord. This situation became more obvious after she saved Mai Ruahan. However, she didn't care. Atonement, there might be another way now. Fang Ling whispered to herself. She took out an old embroidery from her arms, which was almost falling apart. There were 2 characters leanly on it. She could still remember that carefree self of hers. That kind of simple busyness was a kind of warmth and happiness that she had never experienced before. How great would it be if everything in that world was real? Fang Ling sighed and closed her eyes. She didn't have much time to rest. Yarrow Shuangya walked out of the main hall and looked up at the huge and endless spiritual power impact outside the seemingly indestructible tactical matrix for protecting the sect. He quickly withdrew his gaze and turned to walk into the back mountain. In front of an ancient palace, he stopped and pondered for a moment. He called softly, "Old ancestor." The palace was silent for a moment, and there was an old cough. "Ahem. Come in." Yarrow Shuangya didn't expect that the old ancestor would really respond to him. He was slightly happy at the moment, and pushed the door into the hall. The curtains on all sides of the palace were closed, and only a few spiritual lamps lit up a few areas. The sight suddenly dimmed. Yarrow Shuangya came to the quiet room where the old ancestor usually practiced in isolation. Seeing the door open, he immediately walked in. The old ancestor, who usually had white hair and a ruddy face, now had a wrinkled face and a thin figure. There was a little blood on the chest of his snow-white robe, like plum blossoms. Yarrow Shuangya thought that his injury should be better after the old ancestor called him in, but he didn't expect it to be more serious. He was shocked immediately. "Old ancestor. You. Ahem. I'm not dead yet. What are you shouting for?" Immortal Yushu Ding Yang's eyes were gloomy, and he couldn't help but cover his mouth and cough twice. The cultivation of the old ancestors of the 12 sects is a little lower than mine. But I'm not weaker than them. I just hate the weird ghost that greatly reduces my strength. Otherwise, how can I be like this? I'm afraid that's the means of the person in the dark. Yarrow Shuangya's tone was a little weak. It's easy to dodge a spear in the open, but difficult to guard against a stab in the dark. Who ever thought that there would be someone who could unify the power of the 23 sects? The enemy is aggressive and well prepared. How should we deal with it? You and I both know that Grand Elder is not in the sect. Ding Yang paused, and his voice was low. The name of Immortal Yushu is passed on to me. Yushu sect must not be destroyed in my hand. You come with me to see the demon tree Bizhui. Do we really need to rely on the old monster Bizhui? Yarrow Shuangya was shocked, but he didn't say anything. He obediently flew out of the palace with Ding Yang and landed in front of the demon tree of Tea Tree Mount. In the process of flying, Ding Yang's dry face quickly filled up and changed to the original childish appearance. His sluggish pneuma also temporarily recovered, but the blood on his chest was not erased. Yarrow Shuangya breathed a sigh of relief. The old ancestor is not confused. He is still guarding against Bizhui. Senior Bizhui, please show up. Ding Yang spoke with full of vigor, and his voice spread far between the cliffs. Boom, the giant tree swayed, and soon Bizhui's old face appeared on the thick roots. It turns out to be Ding Yang. After you took over the title of Immortal Yushu, you have never looked for me. Why are you here today? Although Bizhui was being sarcastic, his tone was not bad. Ding Yang was slightly relieved and said in a deep voice, "Senior, are you willing to make a deal with me?" Bizhui let out a faint smile. "Let's hear it." Ding Yang held his fists and said in a low voice, "Yushu sect is about to be destroyed. Senior, it's impossible that you don't know it. After the big tactical matrix for protecting the sect is broken, you will be trapped here. I'm afraid it's hard to protect yourself, right?" Hee. Bizhui's tone turned cold. "Your Yushu sect knows why I am trapped. Why do you come here to laugh at me? Senior, you misunderstood me." Ding Yang's attitude was extremely humble as he hurriedly explained, "I came here this time to help Senior undo the seal." Ha 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 ha. Bizhui laughed. "There is no free lunch in the world. Ding Yang, do you want me to fight for your sect? That's impossible. Even if I am trapped here, I will never help you deal with the enemy." Yarrow Shuangya was shocked and angry, but Ding Yang was not surprised at all. He continued to lower his posture. "Senior, the 12 sects have joined hands. Even if you are willing to help, it will be useless. I want you to help me conveniently. There will be no danger." Oh! A trace of interest appeared on Bizhui's old face. "What? You want us to escape? Mo Chin was called to the side hall alone and looked at Li Hai, who came to deliver the message. How can we escape? Aren't we trapped in the big tactical matrix for protecting the sect? It's the demonic tree. Li Hai's voice was as calm as ever. Old Ancestor made an agreement with Bizhui to set him free. Bizhui will evacuate with the elites of the sect and go to other big regions to start anew. I see. Mo Chin smiled bitterly. It was really Ding Yang's usual style. Suddenly, she remembered one thing. Seeing that Li Hai had not left, she quickly asked, how many people is he going to take away? Li Hai looked at Mo Chin and did not speak. Mo Chin's heart was cold. Xiaoliang and Xiaochen. Bei Xiaoliang is now the first genius of the younger generation of our sect. Naturally, he will not be abandoned. It is Qi Chen who will be abandoned. Li Hai said regretfully, the demonic tree is only willing to take away 100 people. If we start anew, we must have an alchemist. Old Ancestor doesn't even want to take you. How come? Mo Chin fell to the ground in a daze. She had already abandoned a disciple. Now she wanted her to abandon the second one? Li Hai stood in place and did not leave. After a long time, Mo Chin suddenly raised her head, stared at the person in front of her, and slowly said 2 words. Li Hai. There was a smile on Li Hai's cold face. Perhaps because he hadn't smiled for a long time, his smile was extremely ugly. You haven't called my name for a long time. Mo Chin shook her head. I know my level of alchemy. In terms of importance, it is not enough to enter the top 100 of the sect. Did you say something to Yarrow Shuangya? Being exposed, Li Hai was silent for a while and said, I don't want you to die. Mo Chin smiled in a low voice, raised her head, and her eyes seemed to light up. Take Qi Chen with you, I will stay. Li Hai was immediately shocked. You should be able to understand me. Mo Chin walked to Li Hai, and her tone was as calm as death. You know better than anyone how I have lived in the past 1,000 years. I want to go down to accompany her. Mo Chin's eyes softened. That girl must be very lonely down there alone. That's not your fault. Li Hai's eyes flashed with pain. None of us can save her, do you understand? So, I was wrong from the beginning. The better I treat her, the more I hurt her. Mo Chin closed her eyes. Don't worry about me anymore, Deputy Lord Li Wush. Li Hai pointed at Mo Chin's sleeping acupuncture point. Looking at the person who fell softly in his arms, his cold eyebrows frowned together, and then became flat after a while. What? You want to stay? Yarrow Shuangya looked at the cold man in front of him in amazement. Li Hai, this is not like you. In his impression, Li Hai never did anything without benefits, let alone self-sacrifice. Did he take the wrong medicine this time? There must be someone to sacrifice. If there is no high-level person to stay, the sect will fall apart too fast. I'm afraid that you won't even have time to escape. Li Hai's voice was dull, as if he was not sacrificed in his words. Yarrow Shuangya's face changed slightly when he heard the words, and then he felt a sense of sympathy. You can always convince me easily. If it weren't for this disaster, maybe the next lord of Yushu sect would be you. It's useless to say more. You should get ready quickly. Qi Chen will take my place. He is a good seedling. Okay. Yarrow Shuangya didn't think much, and quickly left to cooperate with Bizhui. Everything was done in secret. Li Hai looked back and saw thousands of ignorant disciples who were still maintaining the operation of the tactical matrix distributed among the mountains, and his eyes flashed with self-mockery. I still lost to you, Qin. Chapter 536. On the verge of extinction, Yushu sect's efficiency was extremely high. After deciding on the seed candidates, only an hour later, everyone was summoned to a dim hall. Ahem. Ding Yang opened his eyes and looked at Li Hai. Although his pupils were old and turbid, they seemed to be able to see through everything. Then, his old voice sounded from the latter's awareness sea. Compared with Yarrow Shuangya, I appreciate you more. Do you really want to stay for a woman? Li Hai tightened his arms around Mo Chin, pursed his lips, and did not respond. Forget it. The appreciation in Ding Yang's eyes faded and was replaced by indifference. You should go out. Li Hai bowed his head and gestured, handing the unconscious person in his hand to Bei Xiao Liang and Qi Chen, who were standing not far away. He secretly transmitted the sound, "Without me in the future, take care of your master. Don't let me down." Deputy Lord Li, Qi Chen took over the master and called out in a bitter voice, but his voice was stuck in his throat. In such a desperate situation, even the old ancestor could only choose to escape. He wanted Li Hai to stay, but there was no way at all. Should it be so painful to be weak? Deputy Lord Li, you stay, I'll go out. Bei Xiao Liang's eyes were firm. Li Hai smiled, and his smile was as ugly as ever. Your master has lost your senior sister apprentice. I can't let her lose any more disciples. Live well, do you understand? Bei Xiao Liang lowered his head, didn't let himself look so embarrassed, and said softly, "Without you, master will be sad." Li Hai's whole body shook slightly, and then his smile became brilliant. That's the best sentence I've ever heard. After that, he patted Bei Xiao Liang's shoulder, and without stopping, he decisively turned and disappeared at the door of the hall. Bei Xiao Liang was startled and looked up suddenly, but he didn't see his back. His eyes suddenly dimmed, and his heart was drowned by the surging guilt and powerlessness. He always understood that his master was an alchemist with mediocre combat power. Without Li Hai's secret help, it was impossible for him to become so excellent. For him, what was the difference between Li Hai's status and that of his master? But now, Bei Xiao Liang's mind was in a mess, and he was silent. The hall was similarly terrifyingly quiet. The feeling of being forced to leave one's home was unpleasant to anyone. Even those who were naturally cold and indifferent couldn't help but reveal their displeasure. Ahem. You are all elites carefully selected by me. The important task of reinvigorating Yushu sect will be handed over to you. Don't let me down. Li Hai covered his mouth, his face was abnormally red. He waved his hand and sent out a message. In the next moment, a jade-green vortex appeared out of thin air at the center of the hall. Shockingly, it was the teleportation entrance of the immortal Dao Tea Tree. Time is running out. Let's all go in. We will leave the Jojo region with the immortal tea plant. After we get out of the region, it depends on our own luck. After Ding Yang finished his words, Yarrow Shuangya immediately took the lead to enter the green whirlpool, and the elders who followed Yarrow Shuangya entered one after another. With them taking the lead, the rest of the people no longer hesitated and all entered the whirlpool. Bei Xiao Liang carried the unconscious Mo Qin on his back, looked at Qi Chen, and also stepped in. After everyone entered, Ding Yang also stepped into the whirlpool. At the same time, he unlocked the last restriction on the immortal tea tree. Bizhui, it's time for you to keep your promise. Boom. While the earth was shaking, the remaining disciples of Yushu sect were shocked to find that the entire tea tree peak suddenly collapsed and completely disappeared. Calm down. Li Hai's face was gloomy. Continue to defend the big tactical matrix. If the big tactical matrix is destroyed, everyone will die. Shi Qiu, the elder in charge of the supply of spiritual stones, looked sad, and distributed the few remaining spiritual stones in a daze. He was one of the insiders, but what could he do? If the truth was announced now, it would not help, and it would only make them die faster. Outside the big mountain-protecting tactical matrix, the flowing light was overflowing. Tens of thousands of practitioners gathered from the 12 sects crowded the top of the mountain. They joined into 12 offensive tactical matrices to bombard the big mountain-protecting tactical matrix, but there was still a considerable part of energy accumulated, ready to be released. The practitioners above Jindan realm of the 12 sects densely occupied the sky of the entire Yushu sect. In the center of everyone, Yang Zai looked at the Yushu sect's big tactical matrix, which had become as thin as a piece of paper. He was silent, as if waiting for something. Suddenly, a flowing light passed through the nothingness. He immediately grabbed it and scanned it with his divine awareness. Then his eyes brightened, and he raised his head and shouted coldly, "Everyone, attack with all your strength." Boom, 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 The 12 offensive tactical matrices lit up with dazzling light almost at the same time. In the horrified eyes of the disciples of Yushu sect, the light converged into a terrifying energy waterfall, and suddenly bombarded the same point of the big mountain-protecting tactical matrix. Clatter. The harsh sound resounded through the sky, and many disciples who maintained the tactical matrix vomited blood. They looked up at the big mountain-protecting tactical matrix, which was broken with a big hole. The big tactical matrix is broken. Swish. Yang Zai's figure flashed, and the flying sword behind him also flew out, pointing at the main hall of Yushu sect. Capture Li Hai and the holy girl Fang Ling alive. Fortunately, it was dark at night, so he was not found. Mr. Li really dares to accept anyone. No, it's a ghost. This thought flashed through Yang Zai's mind. He put away the distracting thoughts and waved his hand. Everyone in the 12 sects, except for those who appease the disciples of Yushu sect, everyone will accompany me to meet Mr. Li. Speaking of this, he pointed to Li Hai and others on the ground. Take these people with you. Mr. Li. Even if she was seriously injured and caught, Fang Ling didn't change at all. Hearing this word, her delicate body suddenly trembled, and she raised her head to try to see Yang Zai's face. But Yang Zai had turned around and no longer looked at her. Traitor! Coldness flashed through Yang Zai's eyes. Mr. Li had suffered so many grievances, but this woman could still be a holy girl in the sinful place of Yushu sect with a clear conscience. If Mr. Li hadn't specifically told him, he would have killed Fang Ling long ago. Let's go. The gathering place is the Holy Girl Hall of Yushu sect, which is still well preserved. When Yang Zai waved his hand, a group of people rushed to the Holy Girl Hall. Su Yang, who was in front of the team, couldn't help but marvel. The unification of Jojo region would happen tonight. Blockhead, Su Jojo actually did it. And it only took 10 years. Su Mu glanced at him coldly and didn't speak, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Turning the impossible into the possible. Maybe if they followed her, there would be a glimmer of possibility. Sister. A moment later, everyone stopped outside the Holy Girl Hall and saw that another group of people had arrived. Sister Hua Yang. Yang Zai greeted them, and he couldn't hide the excitement in his eyes. We succeeded. Hua Yang nodded with a smile, and her worried heart was finally relieved. Although the road ahead was still difficult, they had conquered a large region, and they were not without foundation. Go in. Yang Zai responded, waved his hand, and entered the Holy Girl Hall with Hua Yang. The empty hall seemed to be unusually quiet. All the lords of the 33 sects subconsciously lightened their steps, and they were a little nervous. Most of them had not seen the Mr., and the level of contact they had was limited to Yang Zai and others. Was the Mr. who unified Jojo region male or female? How great was he? They could get a glimpse of him today. In a few steps, in the fluttering gauze curtain, Fang Ling looked anxiously. Finally, a graceful and thin figure appeared in front of them. A female practitioner. It was a female practitioner. Fang Ling was excited. Was it really her? Sorry to keep you waiting, Mr. Li. We are late. Yang Zai stopped the team, walked to the front, and knelt on one knee. His eyes were full of love and joy. Fortunately, we didn't fail you. Conquer Jojo region. Chapter 537. You've done well. The throne under Su Li automatically turned around, and her charming face was revealed to the public for the first time. Her slender and white fingertips touched the corner of her eyebrows, and her smile was as pure and beautiful as an orchid in an empty valley. Mister, you are a wise leader. The sect leaders bowed in unison, unable to conceal the excitement in their eyes. Breaking away from the sage sect's control and unifying the entire region, if it was 10 years ago, they wouldn't even dare to think about it. Ni sect, which was composed of 25 sects in Jojo region, definitely had the potential to become a member of Holy Sect. The ranks of the sage sects, as long as one was a cultivator, who wouldn't rush to join? The so-called winner takes all. It was nothing more than this. Under the expulsion of such a mentality, the lords who joined the Ni sect voluntarily or not showed unprecedented enthusiasm at this moment. Of course, All of this was built on the premise that there was someone powerful enough to lead all of them. The aura seems to be the same. Fang Ling looked at Su Li sitting on the white throne absent-mindedly. She couldn't hide the disappointment in her eyes. No matter how similar her temperament was, it still wasn't her. The female cultivator in front of him was far too young. Su Yang pursed his lips. This old monster still liked to act young as usual. I'm Su Jojo. Su Li glanced at everyone present. Her tone was light, but it was full of unspeakable overbearingness and pressure. Now you are the Grand Elder of Ni sect, and in the future, you will be the Lord of Jojo region? Do you have any objections? As soon as these words were spoken, the atmosphere here froze. Yang Zai, who knelt on one knee at the front, had a firm look in his eyes and said loudly, Mister, you are so talented that you should be the ruler of Jojo region. Seeing this, Hua Yang's eyes flashed. She stepped forward and bowed her head slightly. She shouted, Greetings, Jojo region lord. LVU, Dongfang Wuxue and others knelt down and shouted, Greetings, Jojo region lord. Greetings, Jojo region lord. Gui Bayan and others who had been taught the soul tactics echoed. Seeing so many people respond, the people of the 23 sects finally let go of the last hesitation in their hearts. They all knelt down and bowed to worship. Greetings, Jojo region lord. Greetings, Jojo region lord. Greetings. For a time, the hall was filled with cheers. The people who were captured alive looked at each other in shock. Even Li Hai, who had no fear in his heart, couldn't help but be shocked. The scene of the change of dynasty in the Jojo region happened in front of him. Everything happened so fast that he felt unreal. However, the faint pain from his body told him that everything was real. Unfortunately, the Lord of Yushu sect fled with his people, and their old ancestor is nowhere to be found. In the crowd, Mu Hong couldn't help but say, and her face was full of unwillingness. When she mentioned the topic, the lords of the 12 sects attacking Yushu sect also remembered this omission and spoke one after another. The immortal Dao Tea tree disappeared as well. Old monster Jade Void must have made a deal with the immortal Dao Tea tree. With the immortal Dao Tea tree's escape technique, it should be able to do it without anyone noticing. Sir, if we don't get rid of these fish that slipped through the net, I'm afraid there will be flaws in our plan. Dong Minglan said worriedly. Ever since she had taken over the Li Yang sect, she, as the vice-sect leader, had risen rapidly in just 6 years. She had replaced the original sect leader and become the only person in charge of the Li Yang sect. With the rise of her status, she not only did not underestimate Ni sect, but also increasingly felt that this seemingly young lord was unfathomable, so she had always been loyal and devoted to him. It's fine. Su Li smiled lightly and waved her hand. Hua Yang immediately turned around and smiled at the crowd. Don't be impatient, everyone. After an hour, you will see the result. As soon as this was said, everyone was stunned, and then their faces changed to different degrees. They were surprised and doubtful. Could it be that Mr. can even stop the immortal Dao Tea tree? That is an old monster that has lived for nearly 10,000 years. Li Hai's calm face became gloomy, and he was faintly uneasy. Was his sacrifice going to be in vain? In the core space of the underground tea tree, the hundreds of people who escaped from Yushu sect gathered everywhere in groups of 3 or 5. Qi Chen and Bei Xiao Liang protected Mo Qin on both sides, both silent. Mo Qin stared blankly at the front of the nothingness. Su Li's voice and smile in the past sometimes flashed in her mind, and sometimes turned into Li Hai's unsmiling face. There had never been a moment when she felt so disgusted. Obviously, she didn't have any ability, but she naively wanted to protect everything. In the end, she harmed everyone. It turns out that I am a scourge. Li, brother Hai, it is me who harmed you, it is me. Mo Qin's eyes were full of self-reproach. She bowed her head and bit her lips tightly, clutching her heart tightly. Master, Bei Xiao Liang looked at his master's uncomfortable look, and he also felt uncomfortable in his heart. But he was also helpless. All he could do now was to practice hard. Qi Chen took a deep breath and grasped the spiritual stone in his hand. At this moment, he had the same idea as his senior fellow apprentice Bei Xiao Liang. Only by becoming strong enough could he protect Master, could he avenge Master Li Hai. Boom. Suddenly, the entire core space of the tea tree shook violently, and then stopped from running at high speed. What's the matter? Have we arrived at the outer region? Yarrow Shuangya stood up nervously. Ding Yang beside him was still calm, and he sent a message. Bizhui, do you want to turn against us? Don't forget, only if you send us to the outer region, I will unlock the last seal left in your body. Ding Yang, don't underestimate my ability. A green light group was transmitted into the core space and turned into a clear picture. In the picture, the boundary tablet of Jojo region was clearly visible. Looking at the surrounding desolate landform, it seemed that it was the Dafu region near Jojo region, which was already very far from Yushu sect. What a fast speed! Ding Yang was slightly shocked, but he was more happy to get rid of death. The Dafu region had been destroyed, and few people came here. It was the best place to hide and heal. Great! We escaped. The rest of the people of Yushu sect also showed joy. Even Bei Xiao Liang and Qi Chen were inevitably affected, and their faces showed a trace of relief. But this kind of relief did not last for a breath. Suddenly, a crack appeared in the green core space. Then, an extremely terrifying repulsive force was generated out of thin air. Everyone was caught off guard, and they were all spat out of the space by Bizhui. More than 100 people rolled on the ground. Ahem, Ding Yang stood up awkwardly, looked up and saw thousands of eyes around him, and even saw Li Hai's shocked face. His face suddenly changed. Here is not the extraterritorial area, but Yushu sect. When the rest of the elders saw the scene in front of them, and then heard the roar of the old ancestor, how could they not understand their own situation, and they all showed despair. It's over. How could it be? Bei Xiao Liang gritted his teeth so hard that he almost bit blood. When he saw Li Hai, who was seriously injured and captured in the crowd, the despair and grief in his heart rose to the extreme. Senior fellow apprentice, look, the person sitting at the top. Suddenly, Qi Chen bumped into him and pointed to the throne at the top blankly. Bei Xiao Liang looked back, and suddenly fell into a sluggish state. Mo Qin did not notice the abnormality of her two apprentices. In her eyes, there was only Li Hai covered with blood. She stumbled over. Yang Zai received Su Li's signal and ordered people to make way for her. There was a slight respect in his eyes. Li Hai covered his mouth and coughed violently twice before he said, "You shouldn't come back." Mo Qin suddenly smiled and gently grabbed Li Hai's cold hands full of blood. "No, I should come back. I figured it out. What happened is irreversible. Since I can't save you, it's better to die together." Suddenly touched by the strange warmth, Li Hai's body stiffened, and then his old face blushed. He said in a muffled voice, "Maybe, things are not as bad as you think." He was not a fool. How could he not notice the unusual movements of Yang Zai and others? The people of Ni sect clearly had 100 ways to kill him before, but they just seriously injured him and didn't kill him. Before seeing Yang Zai voluntarily make way for the team, he thought that Ni sect wanted to catch him alive and then kill him as an example to others. But now it seemed that he guessed very wrong. "Bizhui, how dare you lie to me?" Ding Yang's eyes were bloodshot, and he stared at the old man's face in the turquoise vortex in the hall. Hearing Ding Yang's words, Bizhui suddenly laughed in a low voice. "Tut tut, the Grand Elder of your Yushu sect deceived me that year. How can I fall into the same trap for the second time? It is more pleasant to cooperate with the Grand Elder of Ni sect. The seal in your hand has long been unlocked by the Grand Elder of Ni sect. Don't waste your effort. Tut tut, how does it feel to fall from heaven to hell? You." The killing intent in Ding Yang's eyes skyrocketed. Before he made a move, he suddenly felt a very heavy pressure shrouding him, which pressed him to the ground with a bang and couldn't move. "Bizhui, you can go now." Su Li's tone was cold, and Bijue's eyes suddenly changed slightly. He disappeared in the hall with the vortex, and his pneuma quickly went away with the wind. Everyone in the hall saw that Bizhui was so afraid of Su Li, and their awe of her deepened again. Perhaps their new master was not inferior to the old monster of holy sects. They just didn't know how such a terrifying figure appeared out of thin air in Jojo region. The name Su Jojo was too strange, and it was probably fake. The identity of the new master was too mysterious. Sensing that Bizhui went around outside and returned to the underground of Yushu sect to wait for death, Su Li's eyes returned to gentleness. The 10-year period was coming to an end, and Bizhui would die suddenly in a few days. This was related to the big secret of her body of evil ghost and blood poison. Naturally, it couldn't be exposed. So, she simply made use of the waste and pretended that Bizhui left again. Fortunately, everything went according to plan, and there was no accident. Thinking of this, Su Li looked back at Ding Yang. Looking at the old man who had committed countless sins on her, she smiled and said softly, "Immortal Yushu, have you ever thought that you would have such a day?" Ding Yang's eyes were full of anger, and he was about to speak. At this moment, the pressure that shrouded his seriously injured body suddenly increased, and his internal organs were deformed due to the pressure. The sharp pain surged, and Ding Yang suddenly blacked out. He spat blood and fainted. Old ancestor. Yarrow Shuangya knelt beside Ding Yang. His eyes were blank, and he was at a loss. He didn't even show any sign of resistance. He was just a puppet of Ding Yang, and he didn't have any ambition of rather die in glory than live in disgrace. In the crowd, the lord of Zihon's sect, who was captured alive, sighed deeply when he saw this scene. At this point, there was no difference between sects in Jojo region. Chapter 538. After dawn, the sun was covered by thick clouds, and it was drizzling. In Yushu Mountain, a new bamboo building was built under the disappearing Tea Peak. It was quiet and elegant in the mountains and rivers. Su Li stood under the eaves, looking quiet and focused. She reached out to take a drop of rain. Her fingertips were cold, as if they could penetrate her heart. Standing behind her, Yang Zai didn't understand why this ordinary rain was so beautiful. Master's mind was always hard to guess. After sighing secretly, Yang Zai coughed softly and said in a low voice, "Master, the 23 sects have brought their people back to their sects. According to what you said, we won't announce that we belong to Ni sect first." Su Li came to her senses and nodded gently. "There is no impenetrable wall in the world. Even if I control the spies of holy sects, it won't take long for the reputation of Ni sect to reach their ears. However, if there is room, I will have time to prepare." Yang Zai looked worried. "Master, although holy sects don't know your existence, they can't sit back and watch a new holy sect rise. I'm afraid that a hard battle will be inevitable at that time." Su Li smiled when she heard the words, which made Yang Zai's state of mind calm down a lot. "You come from Void Sword sect, so you know that holy sects in all major regions can never be a piece of iron. Besides, there is the competition for the Tianjiao list, which distracts our attention. Our pressure is not as great as you think." Yang Zai nodded in agreement. "What you said is very true. This period of time is enough for us to stabilize the internal situation. Even if holy sects come to probe, they can't easily collapse." "Yes." Su Li responded. Yang sent a message that the selection of the Tianjiao in other major regions is in full swing. "We have to hurry up and participate in those who should participate. Don't let others see the flaws." Speaking of this, her voice paused, and her tone was slightly soft. "How are my master and others?" Master Mo Qin was placed in the Nuanxin Pavilion with the best healing effect in Yushu sect. She was just frightened, but not seriously injured. But the deputy lord of Lihai, Yang Zai, scratched his head and said embarrassedly, "At that time, I was nervous, and I didn't know the relationship between him and Master Mo Qin. I didn't expect that the deputy lord of Yushu sect was so weak." Su Li couldn't help laughing. Perhaps it was because Yang Zai had been by her side for too long that he had almost forgotten that he was once a genius of Glory sect. In the 6 years when she entered the Chuangxing path, Yang Zai had nothing to do. He practiced hard, and with the help of the secret medicine he made, his cultivation advanced by leaps and bounds. When she came out, she was already at the peak of Huashan realm, half a step away from entering the nature's test period. How could Li Hai, who was only at the early stage of Huashan realm, be his opponent? Go and get busy. In these 10 years, you've crossed 2 realms, from Jindan to deification. Although your foundation is not damaged, your state of mind needs to be accumulated over time. You should settle down and comprehend it before you make a breakthrough. Zai has learned a lot. In the Nuanshin pavilion, Li Hai suddenly opened his eyes, and a fierce light flashed in his eyes. Mo Qin, who was guarding by the side, saw him wake up and immediately asked, Vice Lord Li, how is your injury recovering? Does your chest still hurt? Li Hai nodded and said in a muffled voice, if you can call my name again, I can get better faster. Mo Qin blushed and looked slightly annoyed. She got up and walked out. Li Hai immediately followed her when he saw it. Bei Xiao Liang and Qi Chen in the outer hall suddenly smiled. After the disaster of Yushu sect, the relationship between the master and Vice Lord Li seemed to be frozen. It was a good thing that there was a crack. Senior fellow apprentice, have you heard about the people who escaped with us? What happened to them now? Qi Chen's expression was slightly restrained, and he transmitted the sound in a low voice. Bei Xiao Liang shook his head. I was healing Vice Lord Li all morning and didn't go out. What did you hear? Do you remember the ice prison that imprisoned senior sister apprentice Mai before? Qi Chen's voice was low, and Bei Xiao Liang's face changed slightly. Lord, old ancestor, and holy girl are all locked up there. I heard that there are also the lord and elders of Zihon sect. Xiao Chen, what is the origin of this Ni sect? Do you have a clue? Li Hai didn't seem to catch up with Mo Qin. He returned to the house and sat next to Bei Xiao Liang. He frowned slightly. They seem to treat us very well. Except for leaving the sect, they don't restrict our actions at all. They even let me live in the Nuanshin pavilion to heal. Bei Xiao Liang and Qi Chen looked at each other, and a thin figure appeared in their minds at the same time. The kindness she released to them in the shattered spirit's illusory realm was still clear. If they wanted to know the answer, it seemed that they could only ask him. Bei Xiao Liang was a little lost in thought, and suddenly heard a scream of Mo Qin outside the door. Li Hai's face changed, and he immediately rushed out of the door. Bei Xiao Liang and Qi Chen also followed him. In the courtyard of the Nuanshin pavilion, Mo Qin stared blankly at Su Li, who suddenly appeared in front of her. She looked down at the empty kettle in her hand, and then saw the water stains on the black gauze clothes of the beautiful woman in front of her, which was dripping down the edge of the clothes. Panic suddenly appeared in her eyes. She was careless for a moment, and even poured the water used to water the flowers on the person with the highest status in Jiuzhou region. If this woman was angry, Li Hai and Bei Xiao Liang, Qin, Li Hai flashed out of the house and saw the scene in front of him. His heart suddenly sank, and the scene of the ancestor vomiting blood and fainting last night kept appearing in his mind. However, he still resisted the pressure and walked to Mo Qin's side, tightly grasped Mo Qin's cold hand, and bowed his head. Senior, please forgive me. Mo Qin didn't mean it. At this time, Bei Xiao Liang and Qi Chen also followed up. Seeing this scene, they were surprisingly not nervous. Su Li glanced at the two, and then her eyes returned to the master, who was so flustered that she lost her sense of propriety. She was silent for a while, and her indifferent and somewhat inhuman face suddenly became gentle. She waved her hand to disperse the water stains on her body, and smiled. Don't be nervous, come in and talk. Both Mo Qin and Li Hai were shocked, and then they couldn't help but feel flattered. Bei Xiao Liang and Qi Chen thought it was normal, but now that they knew Su Li's identity, they did not dare to take the initiative to speak. Thank you, master. Mo Qin reluctantly responded and followed into the house, but she was nervous. Although the face of the Lord of Jiuzhou region in front of her was very gentle, which was completely different from the cold and ruthless person last night, she still couldn't stop her palms from sweating. Sit down anywhere. Don't be too restrained. I'm here to solve your doubts today. Su Li waved her hand, and a special light flashed in the depths of her plain eyes. After all, the fact was not like in the Chuangxing path. In the cold despair of the previous life, the master lit a candle of hope for her. Although the candle was still extinguished in the end, it became the last warmth in her heart in this life, and did not let her completely fall into the cold. Unfortunately, it's not the time for a showdown. Su Li's eyes dimmed. Bizhui saw the situation of the master. She wanted to let the master get out of guilt, but the details of the fate ancestor were related to deduction. The more she exposed, the more likely it was to repeat the same mistake. A little impatience will spoil the great plan. Su Li, at this time, you have to be calmer. Even if the Jojo region you conquered is really pulled out, no one will want to be an enemy of a character with the combat power comparable to a junior emperor. But if you show any of the identities of the Daughter of Luck and the body of Evil Ghost, the entire Qingshui circle will come to kill you. Don't use the name Su Li for a long time. Black Lotus transmitted the sound seriously, which was rare. Su Li took a breath slightly and looked at the people sitting in the room in turn. Her eyes regained calmness. I believe you have a lot of doubts, especially the two little guys Bei Xiao Liang and Qi Chen. As soon as Su Li said this, Mo Qin and Li Hai were stunned and turned their eyes. Bei Xiao Liang scratched his head and said awkwardly, "Senior sister apprentice, you have changed so much that my junior fellow apprentice and I dare not recognize you." Senior sister apprentice? Mo Qin was shocked. She turned her head and stared at Su Li's strange face. Her lips trembled. "You are Li." Li Hai frowned, trying to find a trace of familiarity from Su Li's face, but he failed. Su Li pursed her lips slightly and said indifferently, "Although my surname is also Su, unfortunately, I am not. Elder Mo Qin, I respect you as the master of that person, so as long as you have a good relationship with her, I will give preferential treatment." As she said, she turned her head and looked at Bei Xiao Liang. She smiled jokingly, "In the secret realm of shattered spirits, I didn't want to reveal my identity, so I casually made up a senior sister apprentice. Now if you call me that, the misunderstanding will be big." Bei Xiao Liang scratched his head and said embarrassedly, "I am being rude." "You are not." The light in Mo Qin's eyes dissipated, and she was full of loss. She should have given up long ago, but why did she always have hope? "Although I am not." Su Li's eyes narrowed slightly. "I have many former subordinates of that person. Needless to say, Hua Yang, others such as Yang Zai and Ling Qinglan are all her former subordinates in the reincarnation mirror, so you can trust me." Yang Zai. Those are all former talents of Holy Sect. Li Hai seemed to know more. He frowned and thought for a moment. He raised his head and asked cautiously, "So, why do you take advantage of Holy Girl Su's power and painstakingly plan to unify the Jojo region? Deputy Lord Li deserves to be the future lord of Yushu Sect." Su Li smiled sweetly, and her eyes flickered. "How about we make a deal?" She raised her eyebrows, and a dangerous light flashed in her eyes. "You should understand that anyone who has a relationship with that person will be on the opposite side of all holy sects. And you have a closer relationship with that person. If you are driven out of the Jojo region, your fate. I don't need to say more. If I want to continue to develop, I need more help." Li Hai frowned more and more tightly. He naturally knew that what the woman in front of him said was true. Because of this, he wanted to know whether it was worth staying in Ni Sect. "What do you want to say?" Su Li chuckled, and her tone became serious. "How about all of you come to help me? Especially you, Li Hai, you are a rare talent. If you come to be the deputy lord of Ni Sect, it will be convenient to protect the people you want to protect, right? Slowly you will find that we are the same kind of people." Chapter 539. Li Hai finally agreed to Su Li's deal. From the moment the conversation ended, he took over the mess of Yushu Sect. In his view, the deal that Su Jojo said was simply a disguised threat, and he had no room to refuse. Not to mention the difficulty of leaving Jojo region, just the moment he refused, Mo Qin and others would fall into an extremely dangerous situation with him. Whether they lived or died depended on Su Jojo. Even if Su Li really came back to life and stood in front of them and said this sentence, he had to consider whether Su Li would choose to destroy because of the truth. What's more, the woman in front of him was not Su Li at all, but a stranger in the name of Su Li. It was entirely possible that she would be angry and kill him secretly. What if he chooses to refuse? In the quiet room of books, Hua Yang asked with a smile. Su Li's eyes flickered, and she said softly, if he really refuses, I won't do anything to them. At most, I will put them under house arrest and not allow them to leave. Otherwise, if Master falls into the hands of the enemy, I will be restrained. Speaking of this, she raised her eyebrows and smiled again. I have seen through Bijue's eyes what kind of person Li Hai is. He will not take risks for Master. Similarly, for the safety of Master, he will do his best to do things for Ni sect. The safer Ni sect is, the more stable they will be, right? Hua Yang said helplessly, you are still the same as before. You like to calculate. No, Yang, you are wrong. Su Li retorted with a smile. She looked down at her white palm clenched into a fist, and murmured, if I have enough strength, why do I have to think so much? Hua Yang was stunned, and immediately smiled. You are right. Well, you are the lord of Ni sect, who has unified the Jojo region. You come to me specially. You are not here to gossip, are you? Su Li teased, and Hua Yang suddenly rolled her eyes. Li, you have learned to make up your best friend. You are the real master of Ni sect. Don't you feel ashamed to say so? As she said, she threw out a jade slip. Here is the list of all the spies of holy sects. You can decide how to deal with them. After yesterday's war, Ni sect has moved and integrated into Yushu sect, and its reputation is not prominent in the world. Except for Zihon sect, other sects have also found candidates. What to do next depends on your decision. Su Li stretched out her hand, and the jade slip fell into her hand. After scanning it with her divine awareness, she rested her chin on one hand and showed a thoughtful expression. Hua Yang didn't disturb him. She sat at the side and waited quietly. The room became quiet. After she drank the third cup of tea, she suddenly raised her head, and her eyes were slightly fierce. Hua Yang immediately took out a blank jade slip from her interspatial ring and began to record. I will solve the matter of Zihon sect. It is not the time for us to be exposed. All the spies of holy sects must be firmly controlled. Second, there must be some people in Jojo region who have escaped the net. They have already sent the news to holy sects, but only a word or two. Holy sects will at most send someone to probe. Let Yang Zai keep an eye on the teleporter. No suspicious person can be let go. Thirdly, let all sects hold the grand competition for cultivation, and the selected people would come to Yushu sect to fight as before. The top 20 could go to Shengxian Mountain to participate in the Tianjiao contest. Fourthly, use the intelligence route in your hand to find out where the big tactical matrix blocking Chimo circle is. Hua Yang frowned when she heard the jade slip in her hand. Chimo circle? Is it the chaos zone that turned Darfu region into a dead place? Yes. Su Li's eyes were deep. Don't you find that there are very few matrix masters in the entire Jojo region? Reminded by Su Li, Hua Yang was suddenly shocked and suddenly understood. Yes. Su Guohong, the strong matrix master of Su family, has been missing for thousands of years. In Zhenlo group, I found only small fries and crab generals. There are hardly any matrix masters above high grade. Even Yushu sect, which is strong in matrix, can't see a few matrix masters, so we took the opportunity to break in. Otherwise, the holy tactical matrix that protects Yushu sect can't be broken no matter how much time we have. Is it? Under Hua Yang's surprised gaze, Su Li nodded. I think it over and over again, and I always feel that it has something to do with Chimo Circle. I once heard the news that the war in Chimo Circle should have started 4 years ago, but there was no movement at all. It's so strange. Hua Yang looked slightly serious. I see. I'll arrange an informant to inquire about it. Su Li nodded, but Hua Yang seemed to suddenly think of something. She squinted and smiled. Li, you are more than qualified to participate in the Tianjiao contest. Are you interested in taking a place? Me? Su Li was slightly stunned. She had been making arrangements behind the scenes these years, but she forgot her body. She was a young girl in the prime of her youth. The dignified lord of Jojo region can also participate in the Tianjiao contest. Hua Yang covered her hot face, and her eyes were full of yearning. If we succeed and make everything public to the world, What kind of legend will this be passed down by future generations? Su Li laughed, but she really thought about the feasibility of this matter. According to Xianan, Shengxian Mountain was suppressed by the Tianjiao list, and the mysteries of heaven were obscured. She didn't worry about being found out by others. The only thing she needed to pay attention to was to control her power well and not expose too much to provoke the nerves of natural law. This matter might be difficult before the breakthrough of Sueyu tactics. But now the grey membrane in her body was thickened again. Even if she used the power comparable to Huashan realm, the natural law had no reaction. Thinking of this, Su Li thought of another thing, and couldn't help but have a headache. The external incarnation in her hand was almost exhausted, and she couldn't attract the thunder for punishment. Su Bai would not only starve, but also affect his continued growth. It couldn't be delayed. Yang, I once asked you to investigate the big region with a lot of ghosts. Did you find anything? When Su Li mentioned this, Hua Yang suddenly smiled. Speaking of this, I found something interesting. Heh. Su Li was slightly stunned, and Hua Yang continued, do you still remember the Linli building? Su Li's expression changed slightly, and she said softly, of course. By bribing a lord of Chanyek Attic, I found out that the base camp of the Linli building is hidden in the Yin-Yang region with a lot of ghosts. The holy sects sent many groups of seniors to explore it, but because of the special nature of the Yin-Yang region, they all returned without success. Special? Su Li raised her eyebrows. How special? I heard that the Yin-Yang region, as its name suggests, is half of the extreme yin level, and the other half of the extreme yang level. The two are obviously completely contradictory, but strangely balanced. In the crack between the two extreme areas, it is the area where the 5 elements are completely chaotic. No matter what tracking method is used, it will be completely ineffective. Many desperados who are chased by the holy sects are there. Speaking of this, Hua Yang's tone was firm. I heard that the core of the Linli building is hidden in the crack, and the status of the force there is quite objective. It is one of the only 3 forces that control a stable space. What are the other 2 forces? Su Li narrowed her eyes, but Hua Yang shook her head. That's all I got. You may know other information when you go to the Yin-Yang region. There are many ghosts in the extreme yin area. Although ordinary practitioners can't survive there, it should be okay for you to stay there for a short time with your strength. Su Li nodded. There is still half a year before the Tianjiao battle in the Shengxian Mountain begins. I still have enough time. If I don't come back by then, I will meet you in the Shengxian Mountain. Hua Yang stared at her with her almond-shaped eyes. The Zhozhou region has not been stabilized yet. Are you going to leave now? Of course not. Su Li smiled apologetically. The holy sects won't be too slow. After dealing with the people of the holy sects, I will set off immediately. For the future of the Ni sect, I have to continue to enhance my strength, right? Hua Yang rolled her eyes and said angrily, this is really a qualified reason to be a hands-off boss. Su Li chuckled, I believe that you can handle the rest with your ability. I will sell the Zhozhou region later. Chapter 540. 34 Chinese Network, in 1 second wonderful pop-up window free reading, in the underground ice dungeon. Rumble, the stone door was opened, and the moist wind blew from the entrance. It instantly formed beautiful ice flowers and fell at Su Li's feet. As the stone door was closed again, Su Li's eyes darkened a little. She stepped out and flashed into the depths like a phantom. After a while, she stopped in front of a small iceberg. At the bottom of the iceberg, a dense chain of forbidden spirits penetrated and entangled the pale woman sitting on the ice. This woman was Fang Ling. In just a few days, Fang Ling's ruddy face had been frozen pale, and her lips were purple. However, her expression seemed very dead. It seemed that this suffering could not touch her at all. Fang Ling seemed to sense the change of light. Then she slowly raised her head and opened her eyes. After seeing the person clearly, her stiff face finally had a slight change, and her frozen lips opened and closed with difficulty. It's you, it's me. Su Li smiled lightly and sat down directly on the cold ground in front of Fang Ling. Do you know me? Fang Ling smiled faintly. Su Jojo, the Grand Elder of Ni sect who only took 2 days to unify the Jojo region. Now, everyone in the 25 sects knows you. I turned out to be so famous. Su Li tilted her head and seemed to be a little distressed. Seeing this, Fang Ling's smile became deeper. It was not her, but so what? She saw many familiar faces, including Yang Zai, Ling Qinglan, and many people who still missed her. Since there was someone who could gather these people together to avenge her, then she wouldn't have any regrets. Thinking of this, she hesitated for a moment and took the initiative to ask, "What are you doing here?" Su Li narrowed her eyes slightly. "You don't seem to be afraid of me at all." "Afraid? Why should I be afraid?" Fang Ling stared at Su Li. "I should have ended all this long ago, but I couldn't help it. Since such a person like you appeared, I can die without regrets." Su Li looked at Fang Ling silently. She couldn't distinguish or believe it anymore. What happened before was still vivid in her mind. If it weren't for my Ruahan, her bracelet wouldn't have been broken. As for the blessing in disguise, it naturally couldn't be attributed to my Ruahan. For example, Yang Zai and Ling Qinglan were kept in the dark and sent to the reincarnation mirror. After they came out, their temperaments changed greatly. They were completely tied up by the emotional shackles of the mirror world and gave up everything to wander outside. She could trust them. As for Fang Ling, how could she believe that she would continue to be a holy sect in Yushu sect and enjoy the best cultivation resources after coming out? Fang Ling naturally couldn't sense Su Li's hesitation. Seeing that the woman in front of her didn't speak for a long time, she didn't care and continued, "Although you have now gained a firm foothold, there are 2 things I want to remind you. The first thing is the spy of the holy sects. I have heard from the Grand Elder of Yushu sect that there are more than one spy of the holy sects in Jojo region. If your existence is known by the holy sects, there will be a hard fight. It's not your turn to worry about this." Su Li smiled coldly. "However, you are the holy girl of Yushu sect. Logically speaking, you should regard me as an enemy. I didn't expect that you would actually think for your enemy." "Enemy?" Fang Ling took a deep look at Su Li and turned her head away. Her voice was very soft. "We are not enemies." Su Li curled her lips with a touch of sarcasm. "You said there are 2 things. Then, what is the second thing?" Fang Ling's eyes dimmed slightly. After a long silence, she finally said, "The second thing is the Grand Elder of Yushu sect. Although he has been missing for a long time, I heard from my master that the Grand Elder is still alive. He is comparable to the existence of Junior Emperor in the ancient cultivation period. You have to be careful." "Your master?" Su Li's eyes flashed. "Your master? Who is he? Ding Yang? Or Yao Shuangya?" "None of them. They are just in Huashan realm. How can they compare with my master?" Fang Ling shook her head, and there was a hint of struggle in her eyes. "My master, although she is heinous and has done so many wrong things, she treats me really well." Su Li looked at Fang Ling calmly. "So, is this the reason why you continue to stay in Yushu sect? I remember that you have a senior sister apprentice who is also in the ice prison, but I didn't see her this time." "Where is she?" Su Li suddenly said. Fang Ling's delicate body trembled slightly, and the face with deep eye sockets appeared in her mind. However, with a smile on her face, she said softly, "Since you have gathered so many of her subordinates, I have long guessed that you will ask this. But the senior sister apprentice is not like me. Her consciousness in the mirror world is split from her body, and the 2 are in conflict with each other. Since she came out, she has become a complete lunatic." Su Li listened silently. It turned out that my Ruahan was really crazy. She remembered the scene when she met her a few years ago. The skeleton-like figure could still be clearly recalled. However, I later found that the consciousness of senior sister apprentice Mai in the mirror world gradually swallowed the original consciousness. In most cases, she had returned to normal, but she could not forgive herself, so she pretended to be crazy and tortured herself. Until I heard that the master wanted to strip her soul and use it as the core of the tactical matrix. Su Li's pupils shrank, and her voice was imperceptibly bitter. "My Ruahan is dead." Was that the last time she saw her? Fang Ling's voice became more and more low and hoarse. She shook her head and said, "Senior Sister Apprentice has killed the consciousness of Holy Girl Su who killed Sister Li. She did nothing wrong and shouldn't be killed by the Master. So, Luo Chen and I made a plan to send the Senior Sister Apprentice out of Jiuzhou region." "I see." The lines on Su Li's face were much gentler. On the one hand, you can't forget the Master, and on the other hand, you are against the Master's will. You are a surprisingly contradictory person. Fang Ling bit her lips, and pain flashed through her eyes. But she smiled and said, "Thank you for the compliment, Region Lord." Su Li smiled slightly. "Since you have revealed so much, I will change a better environment for you. At least, you will not end up freezing to death like your lord and others." Hearing Su Li's words, Fang Ling was disappointed. "If I had known it, I would not have said so much to you." Su Li chuckled and turned to leave. But she heard Fang Ling speak again behind her. This time, the voice was extremely heavy. "Be careful of my master." "What about her?" Su Li turned her head, only to see Fang Ling lowered her head, and her face could not be seen clearly. Fang Ling continued to say, "She is a person who is more difficult to deal with than the Grand Elder of Yushu sect. Even joining Yushu sect is also calculated. Be careful." Su Li raised her eyebrows. "What's your master's name?" What answered her was silence. The air stagnated for a moment, and Su Li turned and disappeared at the end of the ice road. She didn't ask, because it was meaningless. Since Yushu sect was easily won by her, it was enough to prove that Fang Ling's master was not in the sect. Rumble, the sound of the stone door closing came from far away. After the light dimmed, Fang Ling suddenly clutched her chest, and the blood-red mark between her eyebrows flickered constantly. The mark flickered faster and faster, and finally collapsed suddenly. Fang Ling only felt blood rushing up her throat, and she opened her mouth to spit out a dark red. Phew! Fang Ling let out a long breath and leaned against the cold stone wall, gasping for air. She only vaguely reminded her, but it triggered the inhibitions set in her mind by her master. "Master, in the world of ice and snow," a long sigh lingered. "Hua Yang, I'm leaving." Su Li stood in front of the door, and looked back at the extremely simple quiet room. "I'll stay in the sect. This time, it has launched dozens of dreams in a row, and it really needs a rest." The little black cat lying in the cat's nest seemed to hear its master's concern, and it meowed softly. Hua Yang nodded, and her voice was clear and firm. "Don't worry. I'm here." Su Li smiled, and no longer said anything. She turned into a streamer and disappeared into the sky. In the desolate desert, the scorching sun was hanging high. Two figures could be seen from afar, one in front and the other in the back, moving forward in the wind and smoke. Suddenly, a gust of wind came and rolled up the sand. Su Buwang didn't check it for a moment, and his mouth was immediately stuffed with sand. "Bah, bah, bah." Su Buwang spat, straightened up, touched his dry throat, and said helplessly, "Uncle Fang, haven't we arrived yet?" Fang Yuan tightened the cloth on his face, and looked at the undulating and boundless desert in the distance. "Soon. If the map is correct, we will meet the crack in 2 days. 2 days. Su Buwang pulled a long face, raised his head, and fell on the soft sand powerlessly. He squinted at the fiery red Jinwu in the sky. "We have been walking for a whole month. This yin and yang region is so special. It is not only vast, but also the protective spiritual shield can't block the sand." Fang Yuan sat aside and grabbed a handful of extremely hot sand. "If you don't neglect your practice and step into the late stage of Yuanying realm, these sand will be able to block you." "Uncle Fang, are you still a human?" Su Buwang sat up with grief and indignation, pointed at Fang Yuan's nose and complained. "In just 10 years, I suddenly stepped from the early stage of Jindan realm to the middle stage of Yuanying realm. You almost wasted my practice. Do you think it's easy for me? Even so, you still think I am slow?" Fang Yuan's face was slightly serious. "Today is different from the past. No one cared about you before. Now that you are with me, your cultivation can't be lagged. Do you want to lose face in front of your mother?" Su Buwang scratched his head, and his eyes were a little confused. "My mother, so many years have passed. Is my mother still alive?" She must be alive. Fang Yuan's cold eyes were slightly dim, but his voice was low and firm. Yes. Su Buwang nodded. After a moment of silence, he asked again, Uncle Fang, how do you know that my mother may be in the yin and yang region? I saw that your face changed when you heard the words leanly building. Does it have anything to do with my mother? He had wanted to ask more specifically. After traveling with Fang Yuan for these years, he probably guessed that Uncle Fang had something to do with his mother. But every time he asked about his mother's origin, he couldn't get an answer. What kind of person was his mother on earth? Was she noble or humble? Since she had a relationship with such a mysterious and powerful uncle, she couldn't be the maid mentioned by the Lord Evil Emperor. So, was she beautiful or ugly? Was she fat or thin? Was his personality gentle or forceful? Su Buwang often thought so, and even often dreamed of a woman, but he couldn't see her face clearly. When Fang Yuan heard the words leanly building, his eyelids twitched, and he turned his head away. How should he answer? Should he say that the woman had died for more than 1,000 years, and the enemy was the holy sects in the world? The murderer who killed your mother was not only your father, but also me. This answer was too heavy. What was the benefit of letting Su Buwang bear it? Since Ling Li was not cruel enough to tell him the truth, then, how could he bear it? Uncle Fang, look. What is that? You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.